about that in just a moment. But first, we're going to have the Pledge of Allegiance. You may know this, that we have from John W. North High School, there are two of our former students competing in the Olympics in Rio tonight. So we won't do the Star Spangled Banner, but I will ask U.S. veteran Bernie Holt to come up here and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you would, Bernie.
Okay, ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie. Thank you for your service, too. In closed session, the board took unanimous action on hiring some new key personnel, and I'd like to ask Dr. Hanson, our superintendent, to describe that and to introduce those folks.
Thank you, President Hunt. And as President Hunt talked about or mentioned, there were 6 positions that the board took action on to hire as employees here at Riverside Unified School District. And although I'll read a brief bio on all 6, there are 4 here to be introduced personally. And as I call your name, if you'd please stand and remain standing as I read your bio, that would be grateful. And then when we're done, if you have any family members here, we'll give you a chance to introduce your family members that are here. But the first one, the position, is for Manager, Grants and Project Development, and it's Miss Linda Christopher. Most recently, Linda has been the Executive Director with OC STEM Initiative. In this position, she was the Executive in charge of OC STEM Ecosystem Institute, Chair of Orange County Early Learning Symposium, successfully initialized OC STEM Ecosystem Institute with 18 OC school districts, engaged with local elected officials, school boards, and state assembly and senate to garner support for STEM education and career pathways, and was the recipient of a large-scale workforce development grant from the Cal Endowment. Congratulations to you, Linda, and welcome to Riverside Unified School District. Next is the Assistant Principal of Athletics, North High School, Steve Bernard. Steve currently is employed by Paramount Unified School District. I learned something. Did you know that Paramount High School is the largest high school in California? Over 5,000 students, and he was employed by Paramount Unified School District at Paramount High School, where this past school year he has served as the Dean of Discipline. In 2014, he coordinated an athletic tutoring program and served as an intervention specialist, working with attendance and discipline issues at El Modena High School in Orange County. Prior to these 2 assignments, Mr. Bernard served as El Modena's high school athletic director for 5 years. And in some ways, he's coming home because he is an Inland Empire, grew up in Hemet. And congratulations to you, Steve, and welcome to Riverside Unified. Now, you have family here. Would you like to have them stand and introduce them to us, please?
My wife, Paige. We're both excited to be a part of your family at Riverside.
Welcome, Paige. Thank you. And Linda, I looked out, but I didn't want to skip you. Did you have family here to introduce? Oh, please stand up. Please stand up. I apologize. Introduce you. Thank you for supporting your wife and your mom, and I apologize to leave you out. And again, welcome to Riverside Unified. Next is Assistant Principal at Poly High School, Mr. Michael Gull. Michael has been with the Riverside Unified School District since 2006. He joined RUSD as a social science teacher, first working at Martin Luther King High School and eventually moving to Riverside Poly High School. In 2010, he started working as a staff development specialist with a focus on implementing the RUSD Teaching American History grant. Finally, in 2013, he moved into the position of instructional service specialist, focusing on K-12 instructional practices around social science in the classroom. And in many ways, you're going back home to Poly High School as the assistant principal. And I see that you have family here, Michael. Would you like to have them stand and introduce them, please?
My wife, Wendy, who's also a teacher here
Wonderful. Congratulations to you, and we're very happy. And I look out and I see members of the Polly family there, so congratulations to both Michaels. Next is Lincoln High School Principal, Mr. Anthony Rice. Anthony comes to RUSD from Gary High School and Pomona Unified School District. While at Gary, he has served as the assistant principal, overseeing multiple departments and programs, I believe sitting in all of the seats, currently assistant principal of guidance and curriculum. Prior to that, he served as an athletic director and dean of discipline at Pomona High School and athletic director at Diamond Ranch High School. And before entering school administration, Anthony was the PE teacher and head football and track coach at Pomona High School, Colony High School, and Gary High School. And so congratulations to you, Anthony, and welcome to Riverside Unified School District. Anyone to introduce? No. That's true. So for those of you who might be wondering, we interviewed this morning for that position. And like he said, we just notified him 2 hours ago to come to the board meeting this evening. So we're delighted to have you, and congratulations. And we also have these two individuals that are not here, but I'll read a brief bio. Manager of Fiscal Services Budget in the Business Department, Erin Power. Erin comes to us from Norco College, part of the Riverside Community College, where she most recently acted as the financial and technical analyst. Prior to this position, she held the positions of budget analyst and payroll technician, also for Riverside City College. And we just couldn't be more thrilled to have someone of that caliber come to join Riverside Unified, and that is Erin Power, the new manager of fiscal services and budget. And last, but certainly not least, is an instructional services specialist, federal programs, program quality, and academic English learner. That's quite the title. And that is Miss Carrie Brown. Carrie comes to RUSD from Chico, relocating to Riverside due to her husband's appointment as the head golf coach at Cal Baptist University. Most recently, Carrie has been in the position of elementary principal. Prior to being a principal, Carrie served in the roles of dean of students at both the elementary and middle school level, and was an elementary counselor and middle school counselor, and has served as a middle school social studies teacher. So she brings a lot of wealth of experience to the English learners department, specifically assigned to the federal programs and the money and things such as that, and that is Miss Carrie Brown. And that's the action the board took, and it's my pleasure to introduce them and welcome them into the RUSD family. Thank you, President Hunt.
Thank you, Dr. Hanson. This is a public meeting, so if there's anyone like to provide public input, or particularly to an item that's on the agenda from I on down, in the back there are cards. You just fill them out, and we'll be sure to call on you. That will be coming up. Right now, we're going to have a presentation to the board on the Harmony Project, and from Mr. Garcia and Kim Coombs, I'm sure. Oh, I'm sorry. No, let's make them stay. I mean, they're in a new district. No, you guys, would the new employees like to go out and celebrate and be with your families and all that? Okay. We'll see you later. Work starts soon. Welcome. Thank you for being part of it. Let's just take a break. 1 second, Candace. Let them, I want everybody to hear your report. How's David? Good?
At a meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Ms. Coombs, good to see you.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt, Dr. Hanson, members of the board, in response to a request from the board at a previous meeting, I have the great pleasure to introduce Dr. Margaret Martin, founder and national director of the Harmony Project. The Harmony Project is a mentoring through music program for low-income students in Los Angeles County and a growing number of affiliates across the country, including, most recently, the city of Riverside, in partnership with the Riverside Arts Academy. And we have a few Arts Academy members, Riverside Arts Academy members here tonight. And can I ask them to please stand? Colette Lee, Scott Bauer, and Ophelia Valdez-Yeager. Thank you for your support. The Harmony Project Riverside Youth Orchestra program is beginning August 22nd at the Cesar Chavez Center, and our district is working with Youth Orchestra Director Alpin Hong to promote participation in this program with our elementary and middle school students. Recently, district staff, along with Mrs. Allaby and Mrs. Lock-Dawson, met with representatives from both Riverside Arts Academy and the Harmony Project, including Dr. Martin, to explore opportunities for collaboration, including a possible pilot program at one of our elementary schools. Tonight, Dr. Martin will provide information on the Harmony Project and its participation in extensive neurological research that indicates the potential for early school-based music training to close the achievement gap between children from low-income families and their more affluent peers. Please welcome Dr. Martin.
Thank you, and hopefully answer any questions that you may have. So about 19 years ago, I'm at a farmer's market in Hollywood, and a posse of gnarly-looking LA gang members come walking through, shaved heads, tats, oversized clothing. They stopped in front of a small child playing Brahms on a tiny violin. After 5 or 6 minutes without saying a word to one another, I watched those gang members pull out their own money and lay it gently in the child's case. I was at UCLA at the time completing a doctorate in public health focused on what it takes to make a healthy community, and those gang members were teaching me that they would rather be doing what that kid was doing than what they were doing, but they never had the chance. That child was my 5.5-year-old youngest son, and it was a real salient moment for me. When I completed my degree in community health science, I launched Harmony Project with 36 kids from low-income homes and one $9,000 check from Rotary Club of Hollywood and a small band of intrepid, naive founding board members. 8 years later, I was at the White House receiving the highest honor in the nation for an arts-based youth program from Michelle Obama. 2 years after that, I was invited back to receive the Presidential Citizens Medal from her husband. Today, 2,000 kids throughout LA's highest crime gang zones spend 5 to 12 hours a week learning how to make music together instead of getting into trouble, and affiliated programs have launched in 9 other regions across 7 states. Last year, the U.S. Department of Education designated Harmony Project as a bright spot in Hispanic education. So the idea is to engage and challenge and mentor kids throughout childhood through the process of learning to play and perform increasingly challenging music with one another over multiple years. The wonderful thing is it takes a long time to learn to make music. So we train professional musicians to essentially mentor kids. What we exactly do, 5 to 12 hours per week of mentoring through music, year-round, tuition-free, based on family income, and we typically go into schools in which a majority of the students participate in the qualify for federal meal subsidies, so Title I schools. Our favorite is to go into the lowest quartile schools in an area. We build full-time bands and orchestras in students' own neighborhoods after school and on Saturdays. And as our students advance, we train them to mentor their less advanced peers or work as TAs in the program. We commit to them for their entire childhood through high school graduation, as long as they remain enrolled in school. And our Harmony Boost program helps to mentor the preschool and kindergarten and first grade teachers about how to integrate music into the school day so that it happens throughout the school day. That's the cheapest thing that we do because it's a train-the-trainer model. So the idea was to keep at-risk kids safe in school and out of trouble, but since 2008, more than 90% of our high school seniors with at least 3 years participation have gone on to college. Our 2016 grads had an average length of participation of 7 years, average. Harmony students have attended all of those schools. 50% of our graduating class this year entered high-value STEM majors. Our first doctor graduated in 2015, dentist from UC San Francisco Graduate School of Dentistry. We've had 2 Fulbright scholars. and a Gates Millennium Scholar, all from the gang zones. This didn't make any sense. The head of Child Health and Human Development referred me to this woman because the social science could not explain the cognitive transformation we saw in our kids. That was what was knocking me out. This woman had been studying the neurobiology of learning, what happens in our brains when we learn stuff. And as you see, they can record what somebody's brain hears with scalp electrodes and actually play it back. I don't have the capacity to play it back right now, but it plays back and it sounds just the same. Yes, you have a question?
No,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay, so our brains are experience dependent. They develop according to the way we use them. And it turns out that musicians enjoy signature cognitive enhancements that endure throughout the lifespan, which include the ability to hear in a noisy environment. Our kids refer to this subjectively. They experience this as, I can focus better. I don't know why, but it helps in school. The reason this is important, well, obvious reasons if you want to educate someone, but we live in a country that's spending $7 billion a year on drugs to help kids focus and learn, which have their own side effects. They challenge the liver, so on and so forth. The side effect of Harmony Project is discipline, persistence, accountability, collaboration, including, so you can see that kids, hearing and noise is their measure, but our kids experience this as, I can focus better. Even older adult musicians with mild to moderate hearing loss are still better able to hear in a noisy environment than older adult non-musicians who have no hearing loss. Another signature enhancement of music students of studying music is auditory working memory, which is arguably where learning itself happens. And hopefully your auditory working memory is working right now, because otherwise the stuff I'm saying right now would make absolutely no sense to you. It only makes sense based on, the contextual factors of what I've just said. And you can see how auditory working memory declines as we age, unless you're a musician. So even those with mild to moderate hearing loss. So essentially, what we do with our kids early on, even if they don't touch an instrument for decades, will enable them to live a richer and healthier older life, as well as do better in school. This one is my favorite. Remember the Mona Lisa? Well, since they can capture a subject's the electrical impulses that go off in your brain when you hear sound, and they can actually play them back. This enables them to compare what your brain captured to the incoming sound wave if they control the incoming sound wave. So they developed this test they call a test of neural response consistency, where they'll play the same input hundreds of times, capture the subject's brain response, and then run a simple correlation. When they did this, they got two kinds of outcomes. The first one is what they saw with kids whose moms had some education after high school. So the correlations were 1 or approaching 1. But for kids whose moms had not finished high school or who had just finished high school, you got a more scrambled response like the one at the bottom. But that's not the end of the story. Each time the same sound came in, the subject's brain, with the less educated moms, scrambled it differently. And when they ran the correlations approached 0. They were less than 50%. This is like discovering that 30 to 40% of the kids in the country could never see the board and nobody ever knew. All the remediation that we're doing with these kids is being done in the absence of an accurate estimation of what the real problem is. We've got kids with low fidelity, randomly scrambling brain hardware. They're not going to learn with language unless we can tune up those brains, unless those kids can do something, engage in some activity that enables them to transition and become like the top figure. It turns out that the ability to tap to a beat also links powerfully to the ability to read and literacy, and both of them improve with musical experience, not with listening to music, but with doing it. It's the careful listening, and it's being able to sync to a beat. The rhythmic syncing is so powerful and so important that the quick and dirty test for dyslexics and poor readers is to put on music, ask a bunch of kids to clap and step to the beat. The ones that are stepping off the beat will be the ones that are the most neurologically disorganized, and they will have the greatest trouble reading. But rhythmic skills are trainable, and as they train, the capacity for literacy boosts in lockstep. So this is research done with little kids in Harmony Project by the same lab that published these. In 2013, they published an article in which they documented a neurologic profile of poverty in kids. So the red indicates the precision with which this little kid's brain is differentiating a B from a G. Now that might not sound like very much, but if you couldn't differentiate that, you're going to miss what the word is. If you miss what the word is, you're going to miss the sense of the sentence. And again, you've seen what the scrambling brain hardware gives kids from lower income families. So the top figure was the baseline, second figure after 1 year of music training, third figure after 2 years. Significantly more precise brains in these little tiny, these 8-year-olds, 8 and 9-year-olds, and no changes seen in the randomly assigned controls during the same time period. So this little kid brings this more precise brain into every class, into every other class, into every social interaction, and into his job and employment. Hearing and noise, no change seen in the non-participant controls in the first year, significant improvement in the participants, but then we enrolled the controls so they could serve as their own controls. And you can see it was just the music training that made the difference in being able to hear with greater precision in a noisy environment, like a classroom at school. And everyone's favorite, how important is reading at grade level by 3rd grade? Non-participant controls, as would be expected from this low-income population group, did not meet their 3rd grade reading targets. Participants nailed them. The take-home messages are that the biggest gains were seen in the most engaged students, but it doesn't happen fast. It took 2 years at a minimum of 5 hours a week. I got to say that again. 2 years at a minimum of 5 hours a week before the cognitive improvements began to reach statistical significance, but they continued to accumulate. So as we've seen with our students, our grads that are entering high-value STEM majors, and we've got a grant we're waiting to hear on from the NSF about promoting greater participation of underrepresented groups in high-value STEM education and careers based on what's happening with our students. You need that level of intensity. It's got to be 5 hours a week. The 1 hour a week stuff isn't going to cut it for the most disadvantaged kids, and we're interested in the lowest quartile schools. Give us those. When we're done with those, give us the next. No changes seen in the control group during the same period of time. So, any questions?
Thank you, Doctor. We have Mrs. Lock-Dawson.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Martin. I really appreciate the data and the study, and this is really promising, as we've talked about before. I do have a question, though, and I realize that this is Dr. Krause's study, not yours, so you you may not know the data, but I'm always interested in the outliers. So what about the kids who've had no musical training but who still managed to make it? I mean, how do you explain that phenomenon that, and I guess I would see that, I think you probably had some indication of it in the more educated mothers, I guess.
More educated, I would feel that there would be a more educated parent or significant other in that child's environment. You can't underestimate the difference that it makes if you've got somebody to read to you, if you've got somebody at home. The Jack Kent Cooke Foundation provides scholarships. They're looking at underrepresented kids who show great promise. And when I look at that, I look at, low-income kids whose moms had more education. Or who have an uncle or a grandfather, somebody who was more educated who's living in the household. that's really what you're probably going to be seeing. Because it's true, they make it, but you've got a housekeeper who's living in the house, a single mom who's the housekeeper for a physician and his wife, and they live in that house. And so the kids have the physician and his wife in their life, and then the housekeeper's daughter goes to medical school. That kind of thing happens, but you have to have that better educated person in the life of the kids.
So is it, some of the studies I'm familiar with are, frequency or diversity of language, diversity of words, number of words?
Bilingualism confers cognitive advantages. Our most disadvantaged kids are the monolingual kids living in poverty. The bilingual kids have enjoy cognitive enhancements, which aren't the same as the ones in music, but there's a bit of an overlap. It's kind of a Venn diagram. So that's an exciting something to double down on. But in music, you've got all this decoding, you've got left to right, you've got whole phrases, and a kid from a family where nobody reads might go, the dog ran, but they know what music is supposed to sound like. And if it doesn't sound like music, they're not satisfied. So learning to play a musical phrase helps them with their linguistic phrases.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Trustee Brent Lee has a question for you.
Thank you for your presentation. How has your program in the past, working with schools, supplemented maybe a school district that already has music education as part of it? So how does it work in conjunction to improve the experience for the kid?
Well, what we like to do is we like to, well, first of all, most school districts, if they have music programs, they tend to be in middle school and high school. The problems for low-income kids are that the kids who tend to gravitate to those programs have private lessons at home. And they're so much better than the lower-income kids that didn't have that opportunity, that the lower-income kids tend to bail because they get frustrated. So you give a middle school band or orchestra teacher kids that have been playing in an ensemble since second grade, they're going to think they died and went to heaven. We preferentially like to identify the in-school music teachers and give them the opportunity to be the harmony teachers if they're amazing. If they're not an amazing teacher, which sometimes is the case, we like to work with the district, and please identify your Pied Pipers and give us those, because we'd rather use them, and if they don't want the extra hours, we'd like to engage them at least to do program evaluation and observations and so forth, because they're terribly invested in those kids and invested musically. But lots of times, those in-school music teachers want to be the people who are doing at least the classes, maybe after school hours or during the school day, whichever makes the most sense for that school. And we have programs operating in community-based sites, on school campuses, after school, and on school campuses during the school day. And however you want to shuffle that up so that you get at least 5 hours a week. But it's got to be ensemble-based, because the ensembles is where it's what makes it so wonderfully social, and it's where we get to harness peer pressure. So every time you hear peer pressure, it's always used pejoratively, but why? We love peer pressure because peer pressure is what makes kids want to practice so they don't embarrass themselves in front of their peers in the section and make the section sound bad, because there's always going to be a couple of girls that really practiced, and then these boys that went, oh my gosh, I can't, squeak and squawk. And you know what I mean? It's just a very fine thing.
Thank you. Mrs. Alabi?
So if I hear you correctly, you're saying that music's a language, and by learning another language, you're also strengthening all the other things that come with language skills. But there's something more to that, because you're saying that it's almost language with this social component that strengthens it, right?
Right.
It's not just teaching our children, our kindergartners, Hungarian, and saying now your language strength is that you can learn 2 languages. There's something more.
It's a package deal, because the way we've designed Harmony Project, it boosts the kids' social and emotional and cognitive development. So kids practice listening carefully to each other. Oh, I can't tell you how much I want to have our peer mentors present before members of Congress. Because if members of Congress had grown up within Harmony Project, we'd have a far more functional federal government. They've learned how much work it takes to create something beautiful with other people, how much diligence, how much practice, how much precision, how much control, how much parking your ego at the door, learning when to solo and improvise and when to blend in, and how much time it takes. And these are generalizable skills that go with our students throughout their lives. If you think about it, 30 years ago, when I was growing up, we called ourselves citizens. We traded that word in about 30 years ago for another word that has a completely different meaning, but we most often use it when we refer to ourselves collectively. We tend most often these days to refer to ourselves as consumers. The words cannot be more different. The most patriotic thing a consumer can do is to go shopping, which was what our president suggested we all do after 9/11. That's all he had in his bucket for us in terms of advice. But citizens know how to buckle down and work closely and collaboratively with others. And when you engage kids in a program in which they learn to play increasingly challenging music with other kids of all ages over multiple years and of all different ethnic backgrounds, I mean, our kids say, I've grown up with making music with people I never would have spoken to before. So it's the social, and we commit for their entire childhood. So just imagine, if you imagine that you're a second grader, and you get to be part of this group, and you get given this instrument, and people are going to actually take their time and teach you, and you're going to be with your friends, and it's all kind of cool. And you know you're never going to learn to play this, but little by little you actually are. And then some bigger kid starts mentoring you and giving you private lessons and paying attention to you. OMG, and then a couple of years later, you're being trained to help somebody else learn. I mean, it's a culture, and it's just, I'm sorry, I don't come from a religious background, but every time I visit one of our sites, I have the same thought. I think to myself, I'm looking at a living, breathing prayer, and this must be the way that I pray, and I just pray all the time. So forgive me, I'm kind of like gone about it, but it's really better than we ever thought it could be.
We forgive you, Dr. Martin. And good transition to my DNC friend over here, Dr. Farouk. Was there a lot of harmony there in Philadelphia?
There was, actually. Okay. But thank you, Dr. Martin. And I want to thank again, Colette and Ophelia, and for you taking so much time and attention on our specific community when you have such a broad outlook on the Harmony Project. And your personal story also is really inspirational for all of us and your own personal journey. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
My question, and it might be more directed towards our staff than yourself, but since you had that meeting with the community that Trustee Alavi and I attended, it was very well received by our community. I just wanted to get a sense of what are the next steps in terms of what we can be doing to further move this forward.
It's still being figured out, but the Park and Recs through the Riverside Arts Academy, please chime in if I misspeak, but they're launching the program at a community-based site. The Alvord School District is going at this in a big way. Instrumental programs at 3 schools, and the plan is vocal programs at the rest, because you can do it, that's an instrument also, and it really counts. But I want to acknowledge what makes Riverside different and what makes it easy for me to make a 2-hour drive out here in 108-degree temperature weather, because there are not many communities in this country and that communicate across silos the way this community is working on doing. To have the mayor, the chief of police, the city council, the school districts, the local music universities. I just came from a meeting with Chancellor Wilcox at UC Riverside. That's unique. The cities in the National Forum on Youth Violence Prevention and the similar network of cities in the state of California, there's fewer than 30. And of those cities, they don't all really do it. So we're only talking about a handful of cities in the entire country that are actually taking a leadership position to show what happens if the youth development people in law enforcement and housing authority and park and recs and school districts and social services all get on the same page and collaborate. Risk factors tend to occur in constellations. Unfortunately, interventions tend to be unitary in nature. Harmony Project represents a constellation of protective factors that a child can grow with for their entire childhood. And that's really, it's our long-term commitment that's really the secret sauce. The neuroscience research is wonderful, but it wasn't the reason we got into this. It was for the social and emotional benefits, and they're stunning. I can invite our peer mentors to come and perform and speak to you, and you're going to hear the most articulate, self-possessed young people who grew up in neighborhoods, and their next-door neighbors on either side will not sound anything like those kids, and they don't have futures like them. I should say, how many of you watched the Super Bowl? Did you watch the Super Bowl? Did you see the halftime show? You saw 40 of our string students from LA's Gang Zones performing with Beyonce, Chris Martin, and Bruno Mars on the stage before 100 million people. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a good way to wrap it up. By the way, you had me at UCLA, so I didn't have any question. But I would, believe me, I'll hear about it later if I don't. Mrs. Lee and Mrs. Badajega, is there anything you'd like to add? I know that you have been, particularly you, Colette, have really been working this hard on the east side and with frustration and joy. So come on up, Colette Lee, if you would, and just speak to us about this.
This woman is from God.
Yeah, tell her son.
Well, thank you so much for allowing us to make this presentation, and thank you, Dr. Martin, for coming. You are absolutely right. Riverside is a very special place. We care for our children. We got involved when we found out that the Arts Academy was going to close after 1 year. We know that we want to be the catalyst to make sure that there's social equity for all of our children. That's very, very important, that our children have the opportunity that every parent wants. What we didn't know was that it was going to be transformational based upon the research that Dr. Martin has shared in the lives of these kids, that it impacts literacy. We all thought it did. I mean, you hear people around say, well, of course, music education helps, but to actually see and hear the differences in the brain, you can fine-tune your brain, and can we reach out to our kids in our poorest areas and give them the chance? That's what we want to do. So what is amazing is that we have UCR, Cal Baptist University, La Sierra University, RCC, Scott Bear, who's here tonight. They've all said, we want to be involved in this and we want to make a difference. Alvord jumped in hook, line, and sinker. We now want RUSD to do the same thing because we think that this, it's not the magic pill, it takes hard work and dedication. But we think that we can actually have Riverside be the test case for the rest of the nation to show that this program can make a difference and we can really help solve the issue of social equality.
By the way, Chancellor Wilcox mentioned that UC Riverside has the largest, I'm sorry, help me, AmeriCorps program in the country. This enables the music department to supply AmeriCorps workers, which, I mean, when you, there's an economy that happens when many hands, you know, sort of make light the load. But clearly with the neuroscience and having 8 peer-reviewed published articles, we're talking about you can access remediation funds. This is not, you don't have to go to arts funding. which you could, there's a little bit of arts funding, but you've got whole lot more in the remediation bucket. And this is a joyful intervention, remediation, that it's just basically proven.
Wonderful. Mrs. Lee, Ms. Lee, hang on. Dr. Martin, you have a question from Mrs. Lockdown.
It's not a question, it's actually a comment. It's funny, you just teed that up because I pressed my button to talk before you even said that. But, I mean, the thing that I want to impress on the board and our staff as well is that I don't see this as music education so much as I see it as academic intervention. And I think this gives us a whole new approach to remediation and kids that may be struggling in other ways. And I think this is a meaningful academic pursuit. And when I say that, I mean, potentially replacing things like Read 180 and those kinds of things, which our kids may be struggling with. But the results are very clear that this is not just a frivolous or something that, oh yeah, it makes better citizens or it makes them smarter. It actually does help them read better. And that's kind of the holy grail of what we're
Right,
trying to
the
do.
reading at grade level by third grade was, I mean, I just lay down on the floor when I saw that finding. That was just crazy. But I want to highlight that we've got a preschool initiative that involves sending specialists to spend, even 1 hour a week mentoring the in-school teachers and aides to help them, providing lesson plans and so on and so forth, and modeling and giving them things that they can do to integrate music throughout the school day so that it's not just like, oh, here's the music time, but you've got the welcome song, you've got the circle song. Every transition is done with kids making music and rhythmic, and that is going to change their brains over time.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Mrs. Lee, so much for your dedication. Thank you, Dr. Martin. Kim, do you want to wrap it up on where we go next, or on this? Or this going to be part of our VAPA presentation down the line?
If I can speak to that, Mr. Hunt.
thank you.
First of all, I just want to thank again Dr. Martin. She and two of her staff members came out and met with some of our staff. Two of our board members, Mrs. Alavi and Ms. Lock Dawson, joined us along with Ms. Lee and Alpin Hong, the music director, the new music director for Riverside Arts Academy. And so we had a very productive brainstorming session where a lot of different ideas were generated from everybody in the group. And so we're going to be, we've just flown a position for the new VAPA coordinator for our district. And so we're going to be exploring different ways to bring the Harmony Project into our USD, to partner with Riverside Arts Academy, to have representatives from these groups to be part of our reconstituted VAPA committee. And so a lot of different ideas are going to be put in place based on this partnership that has been already very fruitful in its infancy.
How do you feel about Dr. Martin's assertion that we can use remediation funds? There always is never enough money in art funds, so do you see it applicable here?
I think it is. I think that's something that we're going to be looking at in the midst of all of our different programming that we have in LCAP.
Okay. Well, Dr. Martin, thank you. You're traveling with the right people in Riverside if you travel with those two and others, and we sure appreciate your involvement. And we always want to stay ahead of Alvord, so you'll see a renewed energy soon. Were any of you like me? I just wanted Brent Lee to ask a question of his mom when he was up there. Wouldn't that have been great? I think just to have a board member ask a question of their mother would be probably precedent setting in the 100 years of this district, but it shows it's a different school board and a very active one. So now we'll move to the superintendent's report. Dr. Hanson.
Thank you, President Hunt, and again, thank you to Dr. Martin and those that came to support her, and it's the presentation of the board for the Harmony Project. It was a delightful presentation. Thank you. Board members, it's hard to believe, but 2 weeks from today is the first day of school. And we'll have 43,000 students flock our hallways and come through our gates in the classrooms, and staff's excited and geared up and ready to go, and here we go for another year. And with the conversation that you and I were having recently, there's just a couple things I have in front of you, hard copies that you can take a look at. A question was asked recently regarding the school accountability report card. And there is a blue page underneath the packet, it's the very last one, that talks briefly about the school accountability report card. It's referred to as the SARC, an acronym in our profession. And it's actually updated every fall, and it needs to be posted by February the 1st. Principals spend the fall updating, their school's mission, description, opportunities, parent involvement, things such as that. And if you want to go look at the the SARC report cards from the 14-15 year, you can go to our website, RUSD site, and on the district website, scroll to the quick links on the right-hand side, and it takes you directly to those school accountability report cards. And again, the blue sheet there talks to you about that. The other thing that I wanted to share with you as that recent conversation is it was asked about what are all the things we send home to our parents in the summer. And again, in front of you, you have the Riverside Unified School District Parent-Student Handbook. Every parent gets this. It's in English and or Spanish. And there is, if you open the English cover, you'll see a green piece of paper that gives you some type of table of contents of the things that we do send home to our parents. And again, it's in English and Spanish. And right behind that, there's a card that all of our parents must sign saying they've received this and they've gone through that in order for their kids to register and things such as that. So just so you know, again, compliments to Tim Walker and his staff and actually all the different departments that play a key point in getting this information together every summer. And so those are out to our students, and as they get ready to come back to school, those cards need to be turned in. Some of you may know, just to recap, this last weekend was an awesome weekend. On Saturday, I had a chance with President Hunt and Dr. Farouk to attend the 3rd annual Riverside Athletic Leadership Coaches Clinic, and it was a great success. I remember my first summer here learning about that when I first came in July, and we planned it that summer. And we pulled it off in August, and we had maybe 70 or 80 people attend. Last year we did it, and probably right around 300 in the quarter, maybe 350, and this year close to 500 coaches. We opened it up, not just RUSD coaches, but also activities advisors, leaders. A lot of our administrators were there. We invited our surrounding schools, whether it's the Notre Dame or Woodcrest or Alvord Unified, Moreno Valley Unified, really opened it up. And the lineup of speakers that we've been bringing in is just amazing. And this last Saturday, we had a chance to hear from UCLA All-American, NBA Hall of Fame player, and current basketball analyst Bill Walton. And of course, Stan Morrison, our very own Riversider, was there as the MC, and he too was, I learned that he's the first professional athlete to play overseas. But he and Bill Walton attended the same high school. But of course, Stan's a decade plus older, and Bill talked about growing up that Stan was the one everyone wanted to be like. And then see those two on the stage talking back and forth, it was quite something. I had a chance to stand next to them, Bill Walton being 7 foot and Stan Morrison being 6'8", and I felt small and looked small. But it was wonderful, and also thanks to our President Hunt. He is personal friends to Michelle Himmelberg, who is the Public Relations Director. Well, actually, she is the Public Relations Director at Disneyland Resort and founder of the Association for Women in Sports Media. She was involved, and she even told her story, and she was involved in sports back in the early 80s, 70s, when there were only 2 females reporting on sports. And now for those who've been watching the Olympics, you look at the number of women involved in reporting on sports, and she told her story really the very beginning of Title IX. She was a former North Husky, RCC Tiger, and an athlete herself, and she was a wonderful speaker. We also had Micah Parker, athletic director from CBU, speak to us, and then Jim Clover, medical trainer, very much involved in the sports clinic. And he's come out all 3 years, I think we're the only district that does this, and it's talking about concussion or concussion prevention. And this year was just very somber and emotional because on the screen were Riverside Unified parents and students. Tyler Llewellyn, that young boy who passed away a few years ago, his mom was on the video talking about her experience, and even to this day, thinking about losing a son playing the high school athletics because of concussion. friends from last year, Ron Ford and Daisy, oh, my mind just went blank, Josh Naves, Daisy Naves, Josh Naves, who was that student that had a severe concussion playing football at Poly this last year and had surgery. And then our former soccer player, Tom from Poly, do you remember her name? And she's currently the coach.
No, I don't. She's one of our coaches.
A former student of ours, and she's currently the soccer coach, severe, and she played at CBU where she had a couple of concussions. So anyway, not to make this too long, but that video was outstanding, about 15 or 20 minutes, and it talked about concussion awareness and prevention. And I know that, again, I talked to Jim Clover about getting that video out to every one of our schools, have all of our parents who have kids participate in athletics, and all of our students that are participating in athletics, whether you're a swimmer, water polo, or football, because it was very well done, and we're very fortunate to have a person like Jim Clover in our community. And last but certainly not least was the director for CIF Southern Section Division, Rob Wygod, who came out and spoke, and again, talked about character development things in athletics. So thank you again, President Hunt, and to the board for making this a priority and helping us provide the resources. Again, really quickly, on the 18th of August, which is this Thursday, isn't it? Wow, all 190 managers will be back at Central Middle School, and it's our Managers Leadership Symposium. We'll have a chance to be with them as we continue to focus on our theme, every student, every day, the power of community. On August the 22nd, next Monday, school board, you're invited to attend. I know that you're aware of this, but remember, it is our new employee welcome, scheduled also at Central Middle School, multi-purpose room from 8 until 9. And I know that Missy Barra and her team has been working very hard to introduce all the new employees to you. And it'll be exciting because we have our Teachers of the Year from elementary, middle, and high school. I'll have a chance to talk to these new teachers and employees that will be part of that. And then, again, as you're aware, on August the 24th, which is a week from this Wednesday, is the big professional development day for all 4,000 employees. Most of certificated will be up at King High School. Most of classified will be at Ramona High School. And this year, unlike last year, essentially the district's going to be shut down because we're going to have workshops for all of our employees to choose from, hundreds, classified as well as certificated. Really looking forward to that and grateful to Tim and Dan and their work and their executive boards for helping make this event come to fruition. And then last, I'm very proud, I know he's humble and hasn't said anything in the last few meetings, but as part of their collaboration with the California Restorative School Initiative and their professional work throughout the region regarding work of equity in education, our very own Dr. Fruch, Dr. Michael Rowe, and Dr. Kaisha Holmes have received personal invitations and invited to represent RUSD back at the White House on August the 21st, which is this next Monday. And so Dr. Fruch won't be here to welcome the new employees, but they'll be meeting with the White House Office of the President, and the meeting will be attended by White House directors representing justice, education, and intergovernmental affairs. And the purpose of the meeting is to discuss and plan our work to disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline through restorative justice practices. And couldn't be more proud, I see he already left, but of Dr. Rowe and Dr. Holmes, and then of course Dr. Fruch. So 3 great individuals going back to represent us well, and we really look forward to hearing of their success. That concludes my report, but I would like to give our Chief Academic Officer, Lynn Carmody, a brief moment for an update.
Sure. This summer, on July 19th, we had the opportunity to have some students who may not necessarily stay on pace with what some may expect to be graduation, but we had 30 families enjoy their students walk across the stage this summer on that date when they finish their graduation requirements. So I think that it's to be noted that our district truly embraces the idea that students work at different paces. So we're pleased to have that as the very first commencement for our students this summer. Also, Dr. Hansen mentioned that last November, he had the opportunity to go with Tim Martin and Dan Rudd to the California Labor Management Initiative Summit. And a lot of great collaboration has come out of that meeting, where we've had conversations around educational services topics or any kinds of needs that the bargaining units might have, and the collaboration has deepened. We also last year worked together as we were able to train for interest-based problem solving for all of the upper managers, as well as for pilots for sites where there was the principal, bargaining unit members come together and learn that how to facilitate solving problems together. And that was so successful that we're continuing to train 10 additional sites this year, and we will get to all sites by the time we're done with our training. So something to celebrate as well. Last week, we also had 7 data rollout meetings, and this is a little bit different. We know that accountability with respect to the 97 standards was not, some of those changes were not sustainable. The learning wasn't necessarily, it was good, but the way that we looked for motivation to increase achievement for our students sometimes was more extrinsic than internal. And so this last week we said we're going to actually make note that we are doing it a little bit differently, and we called all of the principals in and went through their data. But the idea was that how would we build capacity around the results versus being hammered through the accountability necessarily. And the sustainable change comes through working together, recognizing the process, and also building the capacity in our staff around the pedagogical training that's necessary, around high level of collaboration, around the integration of technology. So Renee Hill, Assistant Superintendent Renee Hill, will be talking to you a little bit about the student learning and the results from the SBAC. And I wanted to let you know that we've tried to take a different look, just like I mentioned back at the leadership meeting when we went through the study session, and I said that we're looking at building capacity over accountability. Accountability is still important, but it should be driven by peers as well. Finally, I want to share that I have made mention about the Guide for Instructional Direction. We have come to completion on that, so you will get a copy of that. And the essential tenet behind it is to build coherence throughout the organization by having a shared leadership system and 4 simple steps to our success and achievement for our students. So you'll be getting a copy of that very soon. In that, you will have mention of the professional growth system. Tim Martin has mentioned that repeatedly at 2 different sharings with the board, and that's also mentioned in there. And again, it's all about having coherence so that we all know what's expected of us in every role, whether we be a teacher or an administrator or any of our roles. So that's all I have to share tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Carmody, and that concludes the report.
Thank you, Dr. Hanson. That was a very nice report. Appreciate it. And I think one of the people that had the most fun at the leadership clinic and meeting Bill Walton was our chief academic officer, and former basketball player herself, and so I think she enjoyed that. We now have public input. Do I have any cards for public input? I don't. Okay. And, all right, seeing none, then we're going to move to our district employee group reports. And from the California School Employees Association, the mighty Chapter 506, Dan Rudd, President.
Good evening, President Hunt, Dr. Hanson, members of the board, and members of the cabinet. If I sound funny, I had surgery on my jaw last week, so.
Just lean a little bit into the mic there,
Okay,
if you
thank
would.
you.
Dan, thanks.
Chapter 506 has been busy this summer. We had our 90th annual conference, CSEA conference in San Jose, where members were able to take a tour of the CSEA headquarters, and most of them haven't been there before. I unfortunately have been there too often. It's a great building, saw the history of CSEA and how it was started with 3 custodians working to get retirement for a classified employee that she was 70 years old, worked in the cafeteria, and she kept having to keep working. So the 3 custodians went to their legislation and went on from there, and that's how CSEA was born. This year, we were able to bring 19 delegates. That's 3 more than we were last year. This is due to the fact that Riverside Unified has been hiring more classified members thanks to a better state budget and LCAP funding, so we thank you for that. Of the 19 delegates, we had 6 newbies that were shown how the CSA runs business at a state level, and I'm hoping that this will encourage them to become more active in our chapter and in the union, and to help other members know what what CSA is all about. Because a lot of them just, oh, I'm a part of a union. They don't know the inner workings of how structured we are. Also, excuse me, 506 was mentioned at conference, and so RUSD was well represented, as we had our member, Cheryl Carter, is a state chair for the pre-retirement committee. Our Chapter 33 political action coordinator is Nina Moore. She works in human resources. Our CalGen board member, which is it's a program they started 3 years ago where they got younger members more actively involved and newer members for the union to take over for us old people. And his name is David Tovar. He's on the team. Our Area F Director, Dale Sorensen, used the photos that were from our Chapter 506 webpage as photos that were used in the dictionary, or the program for the whole conference, and our pictures were shown that they used for us. So I thought that was kind of cool. He asked me if he could. I was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. Our Member of the Year, excuse me, our Member of the Year, Carrie Aldis, was well represented, and we had, excuse me, losing my voice again. And I was luckily named to be Activist of the Year for Area F, that's our area. And they mentioned that at the conference, and I came in runner-up to the person that won it for the state. Our member unity, oh, thank you very much. Always looking out for me. Our Membership Unity Program Action Plan, which is our bell-to-bell. We didn't win the award this year, but we were runners-up, and they also mentioned that at the conference. I'd also like to take time to, and there's deepest thanks to Dr. Hanson for, again, this year paying for our nice shirts that we wore representing Riverside Unified. And if you notice, please stand up. I brought 10 of the members.
All right. Bell to bell, I like that.
We had to represent Riverside and the historical Ring Cross Bell.
Good for you.
And with that, I would also like to introduce the members that are here present tonight. Mr. Mel Rich and his wife Peggy. And they're both newly jacketed stewards. Elvia Romero, they were our first newbies. Joe Baglia, who is part of our Health and Welfare Committee. Jerry Garcia, Joyce Marsteller, and our E-Board is represented by Michael Green, our second vice president, Nancy Vincent, our treasurer, Colleen Hairston, our treasurer, Bernie Holt, our communications expert, and Carrie Aldis, our great chief union steward. Again, I'd also like to thank Dr. Hanson, the cabinet, as well as our great Board of Education for always showing support, not only with your voices, but with your actions to the classified employees that are in our district. It's that we are an essential part of our daily lives of the staff and students, and for all this, I'd like to say thanks.
Thank you, Dan.
Any questions about our conference?
Congratulations on your acknowledgement of your activism. Any questions we have for Dan and pertaining? Okay. Well, Dan, thank you very much. You know, we're not really allowed to ask questions because it's not agendized. Your comments aren't agendized in advance, so I'd be again breaking the Brown Act if I did.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, all of you. Well, Dr. Hanson mentioned that school starts next week, and there's 42,000 to 43,000 students getting prepared. There's a little bit more than that. Parents shopping at Target and getting prepared as well for that. And to represent them tonight is the president of the PTA, Gina Cheadle. Gina?
Thank you. Good evening. We've been a little busy over the summer. We had our leadership training in July at Arlington High School. It went well. It was attended probably about, I want to say about 250 PTA parents came. Mr. San Martin came over and spoke about the bond measure, which we will be voting on Wednesday as a group and deciding if we will be supporting that or not. So we will update you on that as soon as we know. All of our units right now seem to be running smoothly. We're going to charter Ramona High School this year and try and get them a PTA. They've shown an interest in having a PTA at their school, so we're going to try and charter them. And other than that, our membership drives are starting at the beginning of the school year, and all our units are ramping up to get ready for the school year. We'd also like to invite the board to our, let me see the date here, September 21st meeting, which will have the principals all attending. It's at 9 a.m. We don't have a venue for it, though, just yet, so we'll let you know about that also. We have noticed that there has been a greater parent involvement in the last year or so, and so we just wanted to say thank you to the board and to the district. We believe that the involvement that you guys have, the support you guys have shown in being available and out there for people to see and to speak to has really helped our parent involvement and made our jobs easier. So thank you for that, and that concludes our report.
Gina, thank you so much. Thank you for what you do, and we do look forward to let us know about the 21st. I want to be involved. Thank you. Yes. The next item is the consent calendar. These items are considered routine and customary. They're under the Brown Act to allow for a certain level of expenditures. Do I have any member who'd like to pull any item? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So move.
Thank you, Dr. Farouk. I have a motion. Second? Thank you, Mrs. Alavi. Please vote, board. All right, that carries. Before we go to our next item, I'm going to take a 5-minute break. I'd like to see Mr. Martin for just a second, if you could. I've got something to talk to you about that he's got a text on. So we'll take a 5-minute break. If you come up here, Mr. Martin. And we're back. We can move the consent off the, that was approved, 5-0. So tonight we have a report, discussion, information to be shared with the Board of Education about naming of school facilities, including an overview of policy number 7310, memorials, naming of facilities, and sponsorships. Mr. Sergio St. Martin, our Assistant Superintendent, is overseeing this and has a presentation and a comparison of other districts that is also in your packets. Mr. St. Martin.
Good evening, Board President Hunt, Dr. Hanson, Board of Trustees. At the request of the board, I'm going to be going through Board Policy 7310. District Policy 7310 sets forth criteria and procedures, including guidance on handling the naming of facilities and schools, including the dedication of memorials and instruction on sponsorships. The dedication of memorials is reserved for a student or a staff member that has passed away. Memorials that are acceptable are scholarships or a gift of a wreath in a person's honor, planting of a tree, a day of service, an unpermanent bench or table with a plaque, or books for a library with the name of the honored person. The policy also gives instruction on naming school facilities. The naming of a school is also reserved for a community member. A community member has to meet the criteria that the community member's name has to be based on the history of outstanding support to the district and the community, including ties to Riverside Unified School District and or positive accomplishments that serve as an example to Riverside, our district, and the community. Elementary schools. When naming elementary schools, the policy calls for a different criteria. To create conformity with the existing schools, elementary schools should retain the tradition of being named after an author, a poet, geographical sites, or a U.S. president. The policy also allows for naming specific school facilities. Those that are acceptable are school theaters, libraries, cafeterias, multipurpose rooms, offices, future district honor walls. However, classrooms and academic facilities are not appropriate. The policy has also rules and regulations in order to bring a name forward for consideration. First, all recommendations are to be sent to the superintendent in writing. No public announcements until a unanimous vote of the entire board. Thirdly, the superintendent notifies board members of proposed submitted. And fourth, a unanimous approval is needed to secure board recognition. Fifth, the communications subcommittee reviews costs, timing, and dedication of ceremonies. And lastly, the announcement of the honor shall become public at a public meeting. The policy also calls for instruction on sponsorships. Sponsorships to name a facility for a given donation to the district shall include these facilities: sport facilities, district stadiums, fields, pools, scoreboards, uniforms. Also, sponsorships are not acceptable for classrooms or academic buildings. Now, we've looked at also neighboring districts to compare our Riverside Unified School District. We looked at Alvar Unified, Corona Norco, Jurupa Valley, Moreno Valley, and Val Verde. We looked at their policies and created a matrix to compare all 6 districts. Although very similar, each district has different procedures and criterias when naming schools. This matrix here, as you can see, there's some similarities, there's some overlaps, but there's also some differences here. Riverside Unified School District, for example, is the only district that doesn't call for a committee or an ad hoc committee to be formed. Now, just the marks here, or the X's here, it only shows that if the policy describes or calls for that specific criteria procedure. It doesn't mean that it limits the discretion of the board to make any amendments. And I won't go through each one item, but if you have any questions, we can go over that at this time.
All right. Mrs. Alavi, thank you.
Thank you. I did see one error in your presentation, which is that we do not take a vote on that at that stage of the, you said it,
The regulation.
suggestion goes to the superintendent, we take a vote. We can't take a vote until it comes to a public meeting. I just thought I'd mention that.
I think that, yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to kind of go back over a little history with the board, maybe make a few points. I wanted to tell you that historically, 12 years ago, when I was a brand-new board member, I had a really distressing thing happen to me, and I'd only been on the board about 4 months. But it kind of shaped my view of this particular issue. As a new board member, and without the item being specifically mentioned on the agenda, a board member brought up naming something after someone in the community, and sitting in the audience were the honoree and family. And I didn't know about it, and I didn't know they were going to bring that up. And I felt, as you can imagine, backed into a corner, and I felt as if this had been decided behind my back and was political in nature. And then if you fast forward to another 5 years or so, we had a lot of nominations coming in from all sorts of people about naming all kinds of buildings in the district in kind of a helter-skelter manner. And Dr. Miller, who was our superintendent at the time, acknowledged that our policy was inadequate to deal with 2 things. One that he was worried about was the vetting of potential people, because he was aware that in many districts, something is named after someone sometimes under emotion, like someone passes away and you want to name something or something like that, and that in a couple different districts they've had to rescind the namings of things when they found things out about someone in the past. He was concerned about that. And more importantly, I was concerned about how to do honor to a substantial person that we might want to present with this honor. And the board gives these honors, and I thought they should be meaningful, and they're always 2 prestigious people, but I felt like they should be handed out with great ceremony and with meaning, and should not be handed out willy-nilly. The naming of a building should be something that the board does infrequently and with great ceremony. So we embarked upon what turned out to be a 2-year committee to rewrite the policies, and 2 earmarks of the policy included the time and space to vet a candidate. That's why there was this waiting period of presenting the name to the superintendent. It was merely to have a vetting process where we could kind of make sure that there wasn't something surprising in that. And the unanimous vote, because it came, because it was decided at the time that an honor this big should come from the entire board and should carry the weight of the entire board. And I think you were on the committee with me most of the time, weren't you? So then you come to the present day, and I'm somewhat baffled by bringing this up again after we have done such serious and prolonged work on this. I don't know if it should be changed, but I do want Brent and Angelo to weigh in on this if you would. So you should have a voice. But this has now happened multiple times where I've spent years in a committee making what we think are considerate suggestions, only to have it kind of pop up here again for reconsideration on very little. I think that if this does require our rethinking of it, we need to put together another committee to make sure that it's been also given kind of thoughtful thought. So as far as the unanimous versus not, I think back to what happened on the board 12 years ago. And frankly, I don't want to have political honors doled out unless we all believe that the person that we're honoring is someone we all can stand behind and come to a ceremony and say, this person is deserving of all of the honors that we bestow on this building. And that's why I want to retain the unanimous vote.
Thank you. Is that it?
Yes.
All right, would you go to rules and regulations on that up there? I did ask for this to be brought back to be discussed tonight and to move perhaps to a committee. Numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 are outdated. First of all, the idea that Dr. Miller had that he would notify the board of proposals ends up, I had Dr. Hanson look into this, it actually has Dr. Hanson breaking the Brown Act because it's a serial conversation of a determination. He can call us and say, we're going to paint the roof blue. That's fine. But if he calls us and says, we're going to paint the roof blue, do you want to paint it blue or not? Yes or no. That's a serial conversation, just like the kind that I can't have with more than one of you. I can't have with you. So that's a flaw in our proposal right now. I know that in the past, that the incident that Mrs. Allaby speaks of is an alarming and unfortunate, and really wasn't needed if you think about it, in a way, incident that a past board did, but it is so egregious that its application doesn't apply to a logical discussion here of people that want to follow the rules. That was a chairman of a committee and a superintendent deciding that they wanted to get something done, and Mrs. Allaby is the second board member that's talked to me about this, said that they were surprised that night. I'm against a unanimous. I looked into this. I think unanimous, even though I voted for it at the time, unanimous gives the majority power to one. We're a board of 5. If you give it to one, if it has to be unanimous, then one controls it all. It's not dissimilar to what we had with kindergarten teachers being able to, one of them could decide on full day or half day years ago under our contract, which we changed. So I don't think, I'm open to simple majority or supermajority, but having it as one having it unanimous, I believe, gives the power to one. That doesn't mean anybody up here, but I think it's a wrong type of precedent to set. It was actually done by one group. I believe I had Mr. Martin look into it. Was it a school board, Mr. Martin, or was it a college board? What? A county board had a unanimous. They were sued on it. The court upheld that they can do unanimous because that can be undone just like this can by a simple majority of the board. So you can have a rule of unanimous. So we're quite within our rights to have that rule. I just don't think it's a good rule. And I think that when I hear stories about in the past where I know that when Mrs. Valdez-Yeager was on this board that a lot of our African-American citizens came forward and asked that something be named after Mrs. Greer. I think the first African-American teacher in our district, I believe is what it was. And of course the Greer family was very vocal. They were turned down at a board meeting. Donnie Doty Michelka, many of you know, her ex-late husband was a policeman for the Riverside PD. He was killed in the line of duty. He was a Ramona grad. There was a petition of a couple thousand people signed, please name them Ramona Field after Dennis Doty. The board turned it down. Whether I agree with the board or not on their decision at that time is immaterial to the board held a public meeting. We are the elected officials. We can't, what Miller wanted us to do, and for good reasons, not to hurt somebody's feelings, not to get caught up in the emotional that Mrs. Alavi talks about, that if someone just dies and all that, but we have a responsibility to make these items public, and I think our program, our process needs to recognize that. And I'm sure we can look at other districts and find out they can go through committees and all that sort of thing, but our process does need to recognize that. And also, though I know I did it and all that, but I donated a bench this year in honor of the people that all put the money together for Tyler Wellen. There's also a bench being proposed by a scholarship group that's put together a scholarship for Katie Webb that they would like to promote a bench at Poly. Benches seem to be useful items as long as they match some sort of some sort of criteria to matching other benches on that campus. So I think we need to rethink these things, and I do feel strongly about them. I've also had a gentleman who I won't mention his name here just for sake of embarrassment, but I've asked for him to be considered on the Wall of Honor for Hammerschmidt at Poly, and I can't seem to get the thing moving now for 2 years. So I believe our system isn't a good one. I also know now it's against the Brown Act to have the superintendent go behind and get everyone's opinion about Mrs. Smith that we've decided has been nominated, and I think it needs fixing. Mrs. Lock-Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Two reasons why I think we should revisit the policy, and just not, aside from the fact that we have a couple new board members on, I think your point is well taken there. But having sat on the committee, the subcommittee with Mrs. Alavi for many, many months, there were a lot of things that came up that were caused a lot of consternation among us, and there seemed to be one in particular, and that was whether someone should be nominated for just doing his or her job. So we don't have any statement on whether an employee or a former employee should get a building named after him or her, and this is a distinction. There might be some, we talked about some special category or something for former employees, but that perhaps that may or may not be a good use of the naming responsibility for a building. So I'm not saying that's here or there, but it was a discussion we had many times that was never resolved. The other thing is we talked about was there seems to be so much passion generated by individuals that I suggested a more neutral committee review the information as it first came in, and this would be assembling a naming committee. I think we have the book banning committee. It's the same, not that I want to invoke that group, but the idea is that you have a group other than the five of us look at this objectively and perhaps make recommendations. So those are two reasons why I would like to see it open back up so we can have that discussion.
All right. Before I call Mrs. Alavi, just under Robert's rules, do I have any comments over here? Mr. Lee.
Yeah, being a new board member, I appreciate Mr. Hunt bringing this up just because I wasn't familiar completely with this policy, but I also appreciate Mrs. Alavi's history lesson about how this policy came to be. And I think the thing that caught my attention was the way that a donation can be made for potential sponsorships, and whether or not we've taken advantage of that, and what the thoughts were behind that when that portion of the policy was put into place, and why that was put into place and not utilized, and why it was limited in the way that it was. Because this is where I see a potential for adding revenue to the district, where we're always worried about budgets and being able to create constant funding streams, and facilities are our most expensive endeavor, and then once you build a facility, you have to create a funding stream to maintain that facility. So I look at our arts programs and I look at our sports programs And I just see opportunity where if we continue to leverage the relationships we have in our community in the same direction that we've done over the last 12 months or 24 months, who's to say we can't go to a funding source or a foundation or a family or a trust that's willing to donate 7 figures to have a theater put on a campus or a music school, just like colleges do. And so leveraging some of our local assets and funding streams to be able to further enhance what we already have. So I think that'd be worthy of a conversation, find out what the limitations are and who's doing that currently, and if we could do that, especially if we're looking at doing an arts magnet or something like that. And I do have questions on having a unanimous vote for anything. I can see both points. It's kind of like when you hire a superintendent. You want that superintendent to know you have the entire board behind you. But you never know if you're going to have that one rogue board member that is on the board for a long, long time that just might have an axe to grind with one particular individual or particular group. And I think it's wise when we're making these or making these board policy decisions that we don't base it on the board that we have now, but for boards in the future too. So maybe that conversation is revisited and it ends up with the same result, but I think it's worthy of at least discussing if we're going to discuss other parts of the policy as well.
Dr. Farouk.
I actually agree with Trustee Lee on I think pretty much everything he said. I appreciate the fact that we're visiting this as we have new board members. I appreciate Trustee Alavi's perspective. I think that the due diligence part, especially, I think is imperative. So I think that's really important. In terms of next steps, I don't know if you just necessarily form a committee to discuss this or how will we go about it. But I mean, when I look at the table, we're the only school district in the whole region that has that unanimous board vote policy. And I agree with Trustee Lee that I think we need to be thoughtful of the fact that the dynamics of the board in long term could change, and that could be a factor as well. So I'm genuinely open to getting deeper and understanding this issue better. But I would like to see this whole policy and approach really try to celebrate the history and the community to be proud of and feeling more vested in our school system. So I think if whatever our revised policies can reflect that kind of a spirit, I think would be very powerful. That's what I see when I look at, I know higher education institutions are obviously very different, but when I look at higher education institutions, when I look at some large high schools or school systems as well, I think some of those principles of how they go about approaching this whole issue, as well as from a sponsorship perspective, I think those are kind of 2 areas where we could really try to maximize this as a platform. So those are just my thoughts. But again, I'm genuinely open to learning more about this issue.
Thank you, Dr. Root. Mrs. Alavi.
Well, I could disagree with you just on one point, and that is that a policy does need to take into account the history so that we don't repeat it in the future, and hopefully we would have a policy for a long, long time. It isn't something that we would change year by year. So tweaking it is certainly okay, and I'm okay with putting together a committee. I wanted to address your concern, Mr. Lee. I think what we were worried about was sitting in a classroom and seeing a Nike swoosh on the wall. And we were saying there should be some areas on a school campus that are apart from sponsorship. Now, that didn't include naming necessarily the outside of a lab or something, but that isn't articulated. So maybe that's something that we need to address. But I think we were all cognizant of the fact that there were certain areas in a public school that that could be off limits to marketing. And so that's how that came about. It wasn't meant to limit the sponsorships. And at the time, the things that seemed to be readily sponsorable were the sports and, you know, things like that. But I think that that is something that we could address and we could talk about again. And again, I just say that if you're going to give an honor on behalf of the board should be behind that honor. And I'm afraid that without a unanimous vote, it sometimes, it'll look like political maneuvering. And I don't want it to seem like you're strong-arming one person out of that just because they disagree with that particular honor, because it certainly would seem like that to me.
Mrs. Long Dawson.
Thank you. Just a quick inconsistency on the table. Our policy does state that we can name something on a geographic location, and that's left off of there. Back on slide number, the elementary schools or something.
Right, and only for elementary schools.
Yeah. But is that supposed to be for all high schools or something, or what?
It only calls it out for only the naming of elementary schools. So on the
I know,
table
but
here,
why is it left off on the table? That's what I'm asking.
it's under number 8.
No, geographical site or presence.
I see, but see, it's the inconsistency. That's all I'm pointing out. It says that you've got name based on geographic location. That's one whole line, and there's nothing there that states it. But then you have it embedded under the elementary, so I'm just, think you should probably have some clarity there. That's all
Okay.
I'm saying. Yeah, like all schools or high schools or just elementary or something. The other thing is, I think, you both brought up good points about, I remember when we went through the athletic facilities, but is it a new day now that perhaps theaters or something? I don't know, you know.
I didn't understand your question.
Just, we now will not, in our policy now, we don't allow theaters or
Yeah.
performing arts venues or something, whatever's under there.
I think we were talking about sponsorships from companies.
Yeah.
And maybe this isn't clear, and maybe this is a part that we do need to clarify. We were thinking of Nike.
We
Yeah,
were-
but, I mean, like, you know, sorry, Tom, but.
No, please, I'm sorry.
You know,
Michael.
like why wouldn't you have, like, say, I don't know, Paramount Pictures wants to come in and build a theater for us or something? I don't know.
I don't know
Could you
that that
have
would be
pay them,
bad.
or?
I just, we were,
You got to remember, too, that when Mrs. Alavi and I first started this, we were pushing a rock up the hill with some of the other board members at that time. And so they could grasp, well, this isn't said well, but they could grasp stadiums. They could understand stadiums, but maybe not. I could even see a Bourne's engineering classroom.
Yeah, and I'm not disputing that. I was just saying, I think if we
Yeah, we
do
should.
revisit the policy, I would like to see that looked at.
And let me just remind, one of the reasons your president's doing this, we found out, too, as we learned here, that when a new board member comes on, all past policies really come open for discussion again, because that new board member wasn't part of that decision. He or she has equal rights to the other four representing their constituents. I'm not saying Dr. Fruit brought this up. I asked for this to come forward. But we do need to look at board policies, because we do have new board members, since many of them were adopted. If you go back to some of our policies, they go back to, Methuselah. So, and some of them are just fine that way. But we do need to look at this. We'll ask the staff to move forward. I appreciate the work they've done on it. Dr. Hanson and I will cover this tomorrow and take all of your inputs and open to more. I too have an interest in recognizing RUSD employees and community members that particularly, but employees who I know get paid for their job and make it their career, but some just go above and beyond, particularly those that get the stipends, which really, in coaching, when you think about what our coach for our successful mock trial teams, what he does, and Sherry Harris, who's coached mock trial and Envirothon and all these things, and put so much of their lives into it that my own university names things after, and so does RCC, my other university, names things after past employees, and I think it's a rare thing, but I think it's a good thing. So those are my
Sorry, I would
opinions,
just say the reason that was such an issue for us was that the idea was, well, what employees do we pick, and do other employees get angry, and is that an upset? So I'm just suggesting we look at that in a broader, and have that included in the policies, how we would deal with that.
Okay, Dr. Hanson.
Thank you, President Hunt, and I want to thank the board for your conversation this evening. Appreciate the professionalism which you're tackling this. And let me just remind the board too, and you know this, the process going forward, staff would be more than happy to go back and rework the policy. It comes back to the board as a first reading. And then, of course, you have opportunities to change, tweak, just like we've done in the past. And then, of course, we'd come back for second reading for those type of things if we decide to walk down this path. So just so you know, this clearly isn't the one and done, my recommendation, because it's so important that we bring probably to spend a couple more public meetings discussing this kind of thing to make any change to this current policy.
And I do want to remind the board, we do have some applications before us, one for Mrs. Frost and one for, I cannot think of his name. but he's-
Esgate,
Huh?
Mr. Esgate.
Mr. Esgate, thank you, Mrs. Alavi. Mrs. Alavi, you had a comment?
Yes. Does that mean that staff is going to rewrite a policy to present as a first reading? Who is going to be talking about this and coming up with this first reading thing that we're going to?
Good question. There's some given things in here that were pointed out that clearly this policy needs to be tweaked immediately. For example, a communications subcommittee does not exist any longer. And some of the other information or the minor things that you've pointed out. As far as sweeping changes, we would certainly want to get direction from the board on those kind of things. And I believe, Mrs. Alavi, those sweeping changes would need to be discussed in another open session to have that conversation. Are we going to change anything from unanimous to simple majority or not? And that would come back to the board for future discussions. And if the board decided to then send it to a subcommittee and do all those kind of things, I mean, staff certainly just wants to do the wishes of the board and do the work in such a way. And my only reason for jumping on Ms. Alvey and talking about that, I do believe this should come back in at least a couple more public sessions, and we'll go back and do the work as a staff and come back until the board feels comfortable with where we land.
Mr. Lee.
I just wonder if it would be more efficient and we'd have a higher level of success on our next reading if we had like an ad hoc committee prior to it coming back to open session, just so some of these ideas that were brought up could be vetted, explored, researched, and then maybe based upon those findings that whoever's in charge of that ad hoc committee could share what is being discussed. And then
If I see a common nodding of heads, and Dr. Hanson and I will discuss that tomorrow and get out to y'all right away. Is that good, Dr. Hanson? Okay. Then we're going to, with that, thank you for the discussion, everyone. And we're going to move now to item, it says 2, but that's not it. This is the school calendar under I-2. Very important item every year, and one that I hope this board will take. We are out of step with a lot of the places, and maybe we should be. But here's an important presentation by Kylie Ibarra.
Okay. President Hunt, Dr. Hanson, members of the board, thank you. Tonight is our first presentation to you as the board to let you know what our next steps are with regards to this. As President Hunt alluded to, this is our year. Every 3 years, we come forward to you to look at the calendar. And this is our year where we need to make some decisions in how we move forward, as we move forward, with regards to the calendar. Current board policy states the purpose of the calendar committee is to create a 3-year calendar cycle and recommend that the cycle to Riverside Unified School Board of Education. So our actual policy language reads that Riverside Unified Instruction School Calendar. The school calendar shall show the beginning and ending school dates, legal and local holidays, orientation meeting days, number of teaching days, vacation periods, and other pertinent dates. The superintendent or designee, which would be this committee, shall recommend to the Board of Education a school calendar that shall meet the requirements of the law as well as the needs of the community, students, and the work year as negotiated for all personnel. So that is what the board policy reads. So with that, we're moving forward at this point with a calendar committee, as we have done in the past. The calendar committee this year would represent the Director of Certificated Personnel, which is Daryl Hanson, the Director of Classified Personnel, which is Robin Mesa, 2 elementary school principals, 1 middle school principal, our CTA president, and or if Mr. Martin elects to put someone in his place, 2 are CTA members. And then we also, with regards to CSEA, have the chief union steward, unless they opt to have someone in their place, and 2 CSEA members.
11.
Our intent is that through this process, we're going to do district review and survey. So we will be looking at other districts with regards to what their current calendars are now and whatever process they have in place. Example, if one of our local districts went to their board as of last year, they're in the second year of their 3-year process. Some of them might be in their first year of their 3, some in the last. So we will survey where they're at for what we have access to for 17-18, 18-19, and 19-20. So that is our 3-year term that we're looking at. These are our current surrounding districts. As I said, tonight is for us to present to you. If you'd like to see other districts, we're open to that, and I'll get to a point where there's questions and you can let me know that process. But this was our intent, to be able to look at the districts. And then we have our tentative calendar committee dates that we have set. Our goal is to be able to start right away with this committee, be able to move forward, and have a recommendation to you by November. It's very important that we get this to the November board meeting to be able to get information out to parents a good 7 to 8 months in advance, which that's where we would be at with this.
I have some questions for you.
Absolutely.
You want to, 1, 2, 3, do you want to wait, can those questions wait, or do you want to
I
have
think
questions
she's
now? Ms.
ready.
Alvey, you first.
I think she's ready for comment.
I am. It's
Okay,
just
all right.
not clicking to the question slide, but it is at questions.
Okay, great. So Mrs. Alvey, thank you.
So I have no trouble with the calendar committee, providing that it offer a voice for parents and students. Therefore, I suggest that the committee be enlarged to have representatives from the PTA or maybe DLAC, and maybe a student representation. I'm not sure about that. I'll leave that to the board to decide, but that might not be a bad idea. Then if they come back and say they want to follow like sheep and start school in the hottest month when it's 107 degrees outside, then I would say fine. You know, if that's what they think's the right thing to do, and they weigh all the alternatives and all the parameters. Many things that were critical to us last time we met as a calendar committee are no longer seem to be the issues of the day. For instance, if you'll remember when we met last time, finances were not as strong, and we were really concerned about cost, and so we weighed electricity costs, for instance, of running electricity. That doesn't seem to be so much important today as it was then, but maybe there are other things that are important and that should come out. So if the committee is balanced, I have no trouble supporting whatever decision they can make.
Thank you, Mrs. Alvey. Mrs. Lock-Dawson.
I was going to bring up the same thing. I think we need a parent or 2 on there, just because we heard from parents a lot. So, and it would be nice to have them at the table, so they are not on the table to eat. But what I did also want to point out was, consistently what the problem is, I think, and Mrs. Alvey's referring to, is starting earlier, is always a rub between the high school folks and the elementary and middle school folks, because particularly those that teach AP classes, they feel they're rushed on the calendar that we have, and there's a lot of lost time. I think later in the year, and then the kids end up sitting around, waiting around, doing nothing and doing busy work after their AP tests are done. So I'm not really sure what to do about that, but it is a real issue. And, you know, short of having elementary and high school start on different times, which I'm sure parents would just scream about. I know I wouldn't want that, although I'm dealing with it right now. But I do think we need to address that in the committee. So, and that's why I think perhaps having a high school, I don't know, this is directed at Mr. Martin, I think, over there, but maybe having a high school teacher and an elementary, maybe you've had that in the past.
We have,
I don't
and
know.
that's, Mr. Martin knows that, you know, he's still determining. But yes, in the past, we had a high school and teacher, and we had an elementary teacher.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mr. Lee, thank you.
A couple of things. One, I agree. I think it would be nice to have a couple parents and probably have the same, if you're going to have 2, one from elementary, one from high school. The other comment I was going to make in regards to comparing surrounding districts, would it be appropriate to look at the charter schools in town or some of the private schools in town just to see how we align with them? I know, especially with Encore being here, I know there's a lot of families that have some kids at Encore, some kids at RUSD, maybe not so much with the private school, but Still would be
Absolutely.
curious.
No, we can include Encore, some of our other charters.
Yeah, River
We can
Springs and some other
include
ones.
some of our privates, Riverside Christian Day. We can include Woodcrest and Notre Dame.
Okay.
I would say stick to the larger.
Very good. I think it's a good first crack at it. I want to remind the board that the governor signed, the legislature approved extension of the district of choice, which we are, which puts us at a competitive advantage. And I feel personally that this is a drag on that advantage because of our transfers, as Mr. Walker's explained to me. So I look forward to his comments being part of that when kids want to transfer here and they've already finished testing and they come to here, the usually ones who transfer in. Well, go ahead, Tim. I guess I called on you. Go ahead. What is the challenge in the new semester?
Actually, right now, the renewal of the District of Choice is caught up in the Appropriations Committee. And we have written a draft letter for consideration by the superintendent to go to Senator Huff in complete support of that being moved
I
forward.
apologize. I thought that he'd signed it.
At this point, yeah, so at this point in time, we continue to advocate for the District of Choice to be continued. I had shared with the board some changes they had proposed, inclusive of providing transportation to students of a certain income level who were residing outside of the school district, if it's requested upon by the parents. But the district would have the ability to submit a request for a waiver of that if it was a financial impact to the district. So we were in support of the language at the time that it came out of the Education Committee. We continue to be in support of the language as it stands, but we are hopeful that it will come out of the Appropriations Committee at this point in time, who has basically put it into a freeze.
So is it a automatic renewal? I mean, not automatic. Does it have to be reviewed or a sunset? Is that the idea?
If they take no action, then it will die at the end of this current school year.
This current school year, okay.
Yes.
Superintendent Hanson.
Just want to add to what Mr. Walker said. Just this last Saturday and Sunday that occurred, Senator Huff's office manager, Heidi, contacted Tim and I over the weekend and said it didn't make it out of committee. And usually when that happens, it dies. And so there's this last surge of writing notes, and Tim worked on that yesterday, and we sent it up there this morning. And the other school districts that would be affected by this, Covina, Glendora, Walnut, those types of things. And so we don't exactly know where it's going to land. But as we were very hopeful that it was going to go through the committee, and we thought there was the support, it caught people by surprise, and that is currently in the committee, and oftentimes when that occurs, it doesn't make it out. So we'll keep you updated and posted through the mail-outs or other information as we hear it.
Okay. Assistant Superintendent, I think you heard the board would like to have some parents added to that.
Absolutely.
And make sure I know that Mr. Martin and Mr. Rudd will appropriately appoint the people. Thank you for your report.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a report now on from Renee Hill regarding Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, CBAC. Assistant Superintendent Hill, I should say.
Good evening, Dr. Hanson, President Hunt, trustees, and audience members. Tonight, maybe. Tonight, I'm going back to my first slide. Okay. Tonight, I'll bring an update on student learning. As you know, the data now comes to us months before it once did. And as a matter of background, I'd like to just let you know that the data I show you tonight is not complete as yet. We're in the 90s, but we still have not received some student scores, and it's yet to be finalized and publicly released by the California Department of Ed. So there will be some changes here and there, but we think that the majority of the data is here, and we can talk about the numbers, not so much the causes and cures for the data. So that would be less appropriate for tonight because we don't know the trends and outcomes. One, we don't know the trends for the assessment, it being just year 2 of the assessment, and we have no comparative information for other districts, the county, or the other Smarter Balanced states even. What I can say is that we have been and will be working to implement successful strategies, in particular those used and recommended by Dr. Michael Fullen, who has helped Ontario, Canada, which is a diverse and urban district, improve their system in a system-wide reform effort. I lived in Ontario, Canada for a little while when I was working in the private sector. It's very diverse, and their school system is experiencing some of the desired changes as ours are. In this past week, as Mrs. Carmen Day mentioned, we've been meeting with principals about data, and this is one of the quotes from Dr. Fullen that is underpinning our work. So with that intrinsic motivation and collaborative work, you have also at your seats, and there's some for the audience, seminar series 204 by Dr. Fullen. Our Ed Services team took the liberty of highlighting it for you, maybe to make your skimming a little bit easier. The highlights for tonight are these 4 points. The one on top is Dr. Hansen's point that he talks to us about all the time, is a high quality process will generate your desired outcomes. And in the past, forms of accountability really focused only on the outcome, not necessarily on the process and the systemness. So we're flipping it the correct way now. The 4 drivers that Dr. Michael Fullen talks about are capacity building, best instruction, collaboration, and systemness. Capacity building being both human capital, meaning what the individual teacher knows and is able to do, as well as social capital, meaning what teachers do together and with their principals and district support people. Best instruction for high performance and forthright dialogue about student learning. Collaboration within and across schools, and systemness, meaning relationships between principals and teachers, high quality standards, transparency, and job embedded feedback. Lastly, before we dive into the numbers, I'd like to take a few moments just to talk about our current context. This is year 2 of the Smarter Balanced assessment. Trends are as yet unformed. One thing that is different about the Smarter Balanced assessment, it is on a continuous scale from year to year now. With the California Standards Test, the old one, it was a different scale. Each grade was on a different scale. So now the grades are on a continuous scale so that you can see learning from year to year. Another is that we have more information than just percent correct on the test now. There are 4 claim areas in each of the 2 subjects that we can get information about, and if the student group size is large enough, we can even get some reports on the assessment targets. So we would be able to do higher quality collaborative work around what areas of standards students are performing well in and need support in. Our accountability metrics are yet to be determined. That's where you see the ESSA, our new law, is every student succeeding, is in effect. However, the process is the state of California puts together a state accountability workbook, submits it to the U.S. Department of Ed for approval, and then we can act on it. Our state board is in the process of developing that accountability workbook right now. And so we don't know all the elements. What's currently proposed is that there'll be a 60-40 split between more academic elements and other elements. So of course, reading, writing, math, history, graduation would be in the 60%, and then other elements, those you've become familiar with through LCAP mostly, would be considered in the 40%. State Board met July 15th. They have some proposals, and then it has to be finalized to be sent to the U.S. Department of Ed. It would go in effect next school year. And in the meantime, we would get interim measures from the State Department for what our accountability outcomes would be in the meantime. Sure.
Sorry.
Regarding that 60-40 split, so are you saying there's going to be like a metric that combines those two things in some sort of index, or I'm a little confused with that, that's supposed to?
Well, Mrs. Lock-Dawson, I'm glad and sorry you asked. One measure that was under consideration, so I have a backup slide way back here, is there are some districts in California that are called the core districts. And the backup slides are not in there.
Okay,
so
fine.
there's a 60-40 split that has been modeled by some California districts already. And on the 60 side are academic performance, grad rate, and a growth measure. And on the 40 side are chronic absenteeism, parent climate, suspension, expulsion, in EL designation.
Mm-hmm. So would those, are they using those to like explain some of the academic outcomes? Are they using them to, I guess I'm a little confused.
Good
You know, as
question.
predictors or?
So what I left out of the ESSA part is one function of having an accountability workbook is another part of ESSA requires that the state and districts provide technical assistance to schools that are struggling. So the description of the accountability is to determine what does struggling mean and to avoid having it be only on academics. So in the state board meeting, for example, there is a proposal to have 2 metrics for each, like reading, for example. One, is it a high, medium, or low score? But is it better than before, worse than before, or staying the same? So one big effort is just to get away from, we previously had the API. In California, we want to get away, our state board has said they want to get away from a single number describing a school. Interestingly, the U.S. Department of Ed has said they want a single number describing a school. So right now, at this moment, context-wise, we have that dynamic going on between California Department of Ed and U.S. Department of Ed.
Mrs. Assistant Superintendent Hill, Mrs. Zalavi has a question for you.
I'm following up with her question. I can see how you might rank an absenteeism or maybe suspension. I do not understand how you could create a metric out of parent involvement. I was just wondering if you could address that. Have they actually come up with such a metric?
They actually have discussed it. I am not certain whether they have a specific metric for parent engagement. I would have to read further in the state board agenda. I did not see a definition of it.
But it's not.
But I saw it named as an element.
It's not in real time. It's
Right.
just being talked about.
Right, it's being
Okay.
talked about as an element, though.
Okay.
And I'm sure someone can answer that question, but I can't right now. I will. Yeah. So for our overall outcomes in mathematics, we were at 49% of our students exceeding or meeting the standard. There are 4 categories: exceeds, meets, near, and does not meet standard. So 49% of our students in English language arts exceed or met, and that's a 5-point increase from last year. 36% of our students exceeded or met the standard in math, and that is a 4-point increase. We take a look at both subjects by grade. So in English language arts, these 4 areas are the claim areas that you see. Now, when we get our results as a district, as a school, and for students, we also get claim scores in reading, writing, listening, research, and inquiry so that you can see where your areas of strength and growth are. So like I mentioned earlier, Overall, 49% of our students exceeded or met standard, and there you see the contribution by each grade level. 57% overall for 11th grade, and another benefit of Smarter Balanced is the early assessment program, EAP, is now one and the same with the state testing system. Before, there was an additional test that students had to take, they had to opt into it, so now it's one and the same. If students score exceeding the standard in 11th grade, that is considered to be college ready for the UC CSU system. If they meet the standard, that is considered to be conditionally ready. And then, since this is in 11th grade, students can work to clear that condition through their 12th grade year, so that they don't have to take remedial classes when they get to a college campus. This slide shows the comparison to last year. So we have that 5-point growth overall, and then you see the individual contributions from each grade.
Ms. Hill?
Yes.
How preliminary, again, can you say that? How preliminary are these results?
We don't have all of our student scores in. So how preliminary is
Like
preliminary?
what percentage is in?
We're in the mid-90s now.
Oh, so
yeah, mid to
it's
high
not gonna-
90s. So
it's
yeah,
not gonna
so
change much. Okay.
Yeah, so it's not going to change. Everything will change a little, but nothing should change that greatly. In addition to looking at grades, we look at by ethnicity and by ed program, as required to do under ESSA. So there you see the contributions, and then at your place you had a little legend sheet that shows the abbreviation for each of the ethnic groups and also the current count that was in testing. So for our Black or African American students, American Indian, Alaska Natives, Asian students, Filipino, Hispanic, Pacific Islander, Native, Hawaiian, white students, students who have 2 or more races, bi or multiracial students. Those are for the ethnic groups. And then for education programs, students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, socioeconomically disadvantaged, English learners, and students with disabilities. And then this slide shows the comparison to last year and the contribution of each group. Then this next slide shows for mathematics. Again, we have the claim areas in mathematics. There are 4 claim areas in math, but they're reported in 3 groups. Concepts and procedures would be one group. Problem solving and modeling with data are combined. That's 2 claims combined into 1 reporting area. And then communicating reasoning. So you see the contribution of each grade level, and again, with mathematics, 30% of students overall, and 9% would be considered college ready, 21% conditionally ready. Then this shows the comparison from last year and the contribution by each grade. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Lugdawson, I apologize.
Did the Board of the State Board of Education put out any information on what you could expect the increase to be just based on familiarity with the test alone? Like what would be the
They
standard?
did not in advance. I don't know, is there Dr. Gale, is there a typical amount of improvement you might see from test familiarity?
Just as an artifact of, getting to know the test or using the computers. Do they put out any data about that?
Not yet. So they've researched, and again, what they're trying to do, they made changes from year 1 to year 2 of removing some of the practice sessions, basically because it was found that they were counterproductive or interfered with students when they actually took items, and those have been removed. Other than that, everything that they, I should say this in a different way,
Thank you, Dr. Gale. Paul Gale, our Director of Research and Assessment, if you don't remember meeting him a little while ago. And then here in mathematics, you have your reporting by ethnic groups and education program. And the change over last year showing the contribution of each group. A second test that I'd like to take a little time to talk about is our California English Language Development Test. We refer to it as the CELT. The CELT has 4 domains: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And the CELT, the difference here, English language development, meaning how students are coming along with their proficiency in the English language, not English language arts. So we look at our students typically in 2 big categories. One, in English proficiency. 37% of our English learners achieved English proficiency as measured by CELT. That was a slight decrease of 2 points. And then, as you often hear us talk about reclassified English learners, are students who are English proficient and have met some academic minimums. So in this district, we have a habit of referring to our English learners as academic English learners, and partly that's why. There's an academic portion and an English portion. So that 14% of our English learners reclassified this year, and that was an increase of 2 percentage points.
This is for the materials from this past school year, is that right?
The CELT is given in the fall, so this is actually fall data. It's just reported from the state about now. So we'll have students sitting for their language assessment again in this coming fall.
Because we had a large or sizable influx of Guatemalan students that spoke a Mayan language.
That is right, and those student scores would affect our outcomes for this coming fall.
This coming fall. all right.
So they do affect our programs in school, and I know that our English learner program and Mr. Garcia's team convened a newcomer task force to talk about some practices to help support those students
Very
in
good.
coming.
I'd like to hear more about that sometime.
So just some little bit of demographics about our English learners. In about the 42,000 students that we have, just a little over 7,000 of our students are considered English learners. 300 of them have been here less than 2 years. Those are students we consider to be newcomers. And with the influx of Guatemalan students, I think we're now up to the mid to high 400s. About 4,000 of the students, academic English learners, have been here less than 5 years, and just over 2,700 more than 5 years. So, and I talked about our number proficient in English and then reclassified. So of our English learners, this is just showing, 100%. 37% of our students from the fall last year qualified as English proficient, and 14% of them reclassified.
So,
Yes.
like I say, going back to that earlier, the 27, more than 5 years, they've been with us for more than 5 years, but they're still not English proficient? Is
That's
that-
right.
So, I know that in the Bay Area with Asian students, I remember that they were looking at it, and it's like an 18-month English proficient. What is the principal difference? It's 2 foreign languages. I mean, tell me what the principal difference is, and what do we need to do? I mean, 5 years, that's a college time. They should learn something. I mean,
Yeah. Not being prepared to answer that question
Okay.
fully, Mr. Hunt, I'd rather not tonight, because there's a lot of impacts. And I think a lot of implications for action that already the instruction team has started on, and could give you a much better description than I could in this short period of time.
I'll ask Dr. Hanson if we can bring that back at
We
some
will do
time and
that.
let you give us a report on it. Thank you.
For sure. So in summary,
I'm sorry, Mrs. Alavi has a question
Yes.
for you before you go to summary.
Upon the summary, okay.
Upon the summary.
So just some little talking points for you to remember. This is our second year of Smarter Balance. We, at this moment, don't have much trend information. We will look at the outcomes, the claims, and the assessment targets for areas of both strength and growth. And no matter, our focus is on the process, those 4 drivers described by Dr. Fullen, and making the system robust and the level of professionalism great so that that process generates our desired outcomes. Lastly, just when you get asked or think about a particular student, for a particular student, this is a moment of a day in a year. We should always use multiple measures when talking about a student. Parent information, teacher information. The teacher has had assignments and assessments all throughout the year. And this is one form of demonstrating learning that students have that might be their best way to demonstrate learning. It might not be their best way. So when talking about individuals, we should most definitely use multiple measures. That's my prepared presentation. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Mrs. Alavi.
Thank you. You know, my daughter, who takes a national nurse practitioner test online, gets the results back in a week. I think it's appalling that we have to wait a year to get this, especially the CELT information. And I'm wondering whether the board wouldn't think it would be appropriate to write a letter to the state superintendent and tell him that, from our point of view, this is a worthless system. No, I mean it.
I know you do.
To wait a year for this, for these results, not to even get them completely.
Well, there's 2 different areas, Mrs. Alavi, not that I want to discourage you from writing your letter, but the
Not that it would do any good.
Yeah, the CELT, we get the data sooner. It's not publicly reported until now. And just as the CST was revised to the Smarter Balance Assessment, the CELT is being revised to a new English learner assessment that would have faster results, but not a week.
Who promises faster results?
The State Department, and they deliver it on Smarter Balance. So if you remember, with the California Standards Test, students would sit in the spring, so May, June, and we would get results September, October. So we started getting results earlier, and we have 90-some% now. So that's gotten sooner, but not a week.
She's got a great point, though. Is there a political reason for, should we think, is there a reason I mean, it always confuses me that they embargo this stuff anyhow. And, I mean, what are they trying, what is the reason for that? I don't disagree with your letter, but I want to have that second paragraph as to why are you doing this?
For Smarter Balance, one reason would be, and I'm just speculating here, one reason would be volume. You have millions of students in California taking the test, and this is now a national test, so you have many students in many states. From my own learning experience, I went to an item scoring workshop for Smarter Balance to learn how it's done, and it's quite a complicated process. They have teams spread throughout the U.S., and they have millions of tests incoming. They score, but then they double score a certain percentage to make sure that they have reliability and validity between scores. There's things that they have to resolve, and it's a lot of tests.
Dr. Farouk, please.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So, Renee, when you mentioned these study areas and the focus on the process, at that point, you're going to revisit this with the board after you've made that determination, that analysis, right?
We'd be happy to do that. At that time, it'd probably be at least a duo show with Mr. Garcia and myself at least, and maybe more, but we can certainly do that.
Thank you. Mrs. Locke Dawson has a question for you.
I want to go back to your comments about the experimental design here and what they're measuring, and I'm still, of course, trying to wrap my brain around this, but I don't know, perhaps Dr. Gale, you could provide for me. I would love to see studies on I just would like to see the experimental design on the whole SBAC and how it's been, you know, verified, and what is it, number of right, wrong answers? How do they score the narrative portions? How do they, and then what do they intend to do with those data other than predicting, you know, trends? Are there papers out there about that? I guess I'm just.
I'll start and then Dr. Gale can pick up. One thing that he has a PhD in the area, so I just have an interest in the area. One thing that I've been pleased and impressed by with Smarter Balance is from the very beginning, they made their design process transparent to everyone. They told us how the claims were going to be written, how the claims and targets would be built, how they articulate from year to year. And every year, we get a giant pre-test guide and a giant post-test guide that has some of that. I know there are some studies being done. If you know more, you can take it from there.
Well, basically, you know, just going by this, it's becoming more and more familiar to us what's coming out. So there's the design aspect, and then there's the rollout of it. And then you have all of the testing design within. So as I spoke before about more of the bias, that's more of the psychometric characteristics of it. So just to make sure these assessments purport what they're supposed to measure. And then there's the whole other aspect of access, which is more of the process. So do students have the instruction, is it lined? And then when they're asked these questions, do they have the knowledge of how to use computers and everything like that, just to communicate that knowledge? So you're asking kind of a very broad question, so if we can focus it a bit and then follow up with it, we can be more poignant and, well, okay, we can answer this one here, and then, you know, there's a lot of research being done sporadically, but do you want it in a context of a diverse community with the students that we have? We follow up with that.
Yeah,
So
and we
that's
can,
what I'd come
we can
back
talk
to
about
is-
it later, and I
Right,
can
yeah,
get with
right, because
Renee
that's
about it.
broad, yeah.
I'm just like, you know, I'm just curious, we're gonna have these huge data sets, we're gonna have all these data, and, you know, I would love to see if anybody's going to do anything with the data other than tell us trends of whether up or down. I mean, that's like, you know, who's going to interpret these things? Who's going to put out papers on, you know, what's correlative, what's, you know, what's predictive? I mean, this is a treasure trove of data. If what you're telling me is huge, I would like to know, what are we gonna do with it?
Right, we have that
Thanks.
trust in everyone.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just
so the
yeah.
Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium will do some of that work consortium-wise, and I think it's always good for districts to communicate to the State Department and to the consortium what we're interested in seeing. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms.
You're
Hill.
welcome.
Appreciate this very much. We look forward to follow-up. The next item is an action item. I wonder if the board has had the opportunity at your desk. There's a memo from Cooperative Strategies. Have you seen that? I'd like you.
Is it the same one that was in the mail out?
Was this in the mail? Oh, it's the same as the mail. I'm sorry. I misunderstood Dr. Hanson. All right. So we're going to move forward then on this. This is an item regarding the election code and possible changes to our elections. Ms. Kadish is our Chief Business Officer and Government Relations.
Good evening, President Hunt, Dr. Hanson, board members. At the request of the board, this item was before you in the last meeting, and it was suggested that we include additional language in the resolution. But not only that, maybe you already had a gut feeling about the data behind this, but you wanted some confirmation and actually analyze that data from the register of voters. So we have asked legal counsel to engage with Cooperative Strategies, the company, and we have a representative that actually worked on this data with us, Larry Furshaw from Cooperative Strategies here, to go over just the highlight of this letter, and then if you have any questions regarding the data that's provided.
Would you repeat your name again, Mr. Kershaw?
Sure. Larry Furchaw with Cooperative Strategies, formerly known as Delinka Group. We helped the district with the trustee areas a couple years back.
Right.
Just a way of introduction. So for some of you that were a familiar face, but a different name. As you know, SB 415, which was signed by the governor last year, passed by the legislature, says that a local subdivision, political subdivision can't hold an election in an odd year, where it's shown that it results in a significant decrease in voter turnout. And that's defined as 25% reduction from what is seen in the statewide general elections for a 4-year or a four election period average. So you have the memo there. On the second page, we identify that in Table 1 for the November 2008 through November 2014 elections, the four election average of 60% voter turnout within the boundaries of Riverside Unified. And that's based on gathering data from the statewide database, which aggregates this kind of information from local registrars of voters. And compared that to the voter turnout in the last 4 board elections, and you see there the average would be about 16%, just roughly eyeballing it. In no election was the voter turnout greater than 19% in any of those 4 elections. The 25% threshold would be 45%, so any voter turnout of under 45% would be considered, potentially against the law that was recently signed. So that the remedy of that is to switch from the odd year elections that the district has used to the even year elections that are provided by the law. The resolution you have before you calls for doing that is in the November 2018 election. So with that, I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kershaw. Do we have any questions? All right, I'll be sure that the board is looking at the resolution, which is Resolution 2016-17-8. Mr. Lee, you have a question?
Yeah, my question's for staff.
Okay.
First, thanks for providing this information. It's kind of what I think all of us were looking for last time it was presented. But I do have a question. When was this policy changed to go to odd year elections? I think it was in the last 15 years. And if anybody found out why?
We looked in the last 15 years and it wasn't changed in the last, it was changed even before that. And so if it was changed.
Okay. Yeah, so we don't know why.
No, we tried to look up that information.
Okay.
And we couldn't find the information the last 15 years.
What I was told once, Mr. Lee, is that Dr. Beatty shared that, because I remember he was a staffer at the time, that they were hoping to, just as the article today talked about, our bond will be, reporters are worried that our bond will be lost at the bottom of the ballot, that they wanted more recognition given to the school board races, and that they were in the odd years, they thought the public could pay more attention to it. Perhaps 20 years ago that was true, but it's voting trends now don't really support that.
All right, thank you.
Any other
Thank you.
questions?
So do I have a call for action to support the staff recommends the resolution? If you'd look through it, that would have us comply with the law, consolidate the election date for the members of the board for the dates of the California election in November and even years, and pursuant to election code, et cetera. Further resolves that the superintendent will further forward this resolution to our Riverside County Board of Supes, who explained the rationale. They're the ones by law who approve our request. And that the superintendent would then notify the elections office of this change. And if it's approved, that the date of the election, the next election will be moved from November 17 to November 2018. Each subsequent board member election will be held 2 years thereafter, November of even years. And so do I have a motion for that approval?
Yeah, move to approve.
And I second.
Thank you. I have a motion to approve and a second from Mrs. Locke Dawson. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, please vote. That carries by unanimous vote. Thank you. Now we'll go to a recommendation. The Board of Education approve a resolution, which is 1617-10, in support of the California Public Education Facilities Bond Initiative 2016. Mrs. Kadish. CBO Kadish.
This is at the request of the board also to support cash effort, the Coalition of Adequate School Housing, to for their measure that they actually collected signatures to put on the ballot for the November 2016. And just to let you know that this measure would provide funding for school districts to build facilities. Our school district could benefit from the state school building program as it stands in the range of over $200 million of matching funds that we could have access to in the future for new construction and modernization projects. And so it's in our best interest to support their effort. into having this be a success at the November election.
Thank you. Mrs. Locke Dawson has a question for you, followed by Dr. Farouk.
Thanks, Mrs. Kakish. So in previous board meetings and reports, we've been told that we would not be able to avail ourselves of this amount. What's the discrepancy now? I mean, this is new to me that we heard this much. And I was looking at the table and I was trying to figure out what had changed from, I don't know, 6 months ago.
So the data that relates to eligibility for school district to access funds has a lot to do with enrollment. And so what we did just recently, we reviewed that data with a consultant, and we wanted to make sure, we've always known we had access to modernization funds, but we wanted to make sure that we also have not neglected any new construction funds. I know our district has not grown in a while, but again, there is methodology to actually estimate eligibility, and we've engaged a consultant recently under the direction of Mr. St. Martin and his team, and they reviewed all that data again. So it was a good opportunity for us to do as we access this, as we placed a bond ourselves on the election, that when voters ask us what is really our motive to put that on the ballot, was to try to renovate and construct new facilities within our district, but possibly with actually mitigating that with matching funds from the state, which would make our program grow further than just what we're accessing from local funds. Yes, and we will review this data annually, and it'll change with enrollment, and so we will keep you updated.
Thank you. Dr. Farouk.
I motion to approve.
All right, I have a motion from Dr. Farouk to approve Resolution 216-17-10, support of the California Public Education Facilities Bond Initiative 2016. Is there a second to this motion? Mrs. Locke Dawson, thank you for the second. Any more questions or comments? Hearing none, thank you. Yes, thank you. That passes unanimously. Congratulations, Mr. San Martin, for filling in a void we've had for a couple of years now, thinking we're getting nothing out of it. So, very good. Thank you for your work. All right, we'll go to it's a board policy. This is a first reading. Tim Walker will bring this up. It's considered Board Policy 5144 on discipline, which is being presented for a first reading. Mr. Walker. And by the way, I just want to say that it does not, even though the board, it's at the board's discretion if they want to motion for, or if they want to carry over to second reading. So just remind you of that.
President Hunt, Superintendent Hanson, and members of the board, before you this evening is Board Policy 5144 on the area of discipline. Dr. Gary McGuire is going to walk you through this, answer any questions, and seek clarification and direction from the board. For a point of clarification, under purpose, the word clear is supposed to be clarify, and under position, the word conductive is supposed to be conducive. So if you could just make those corrections on your document, we'll proceed.
And I'm
Does
here
that
to
ruin your questions, Mrs. Alavi? Did you already
Yes.
catch those? I was going to say.
Exactly.
And there is one other typo on the very last page.
Okay.
The date should say August 15th, 2016. We had it prepared for May 31st and
Okay.
didn't come to you.
All right.
Hello, doctor. How are you?
Good.
Tell us about this new discipline.
Well, basically, since laws have changed frequently in the last several years in regards to discipline, this aligns the board policy with current law and case law in regard to discipline.
Anything that would jump out to parents that would cause them alarm and shock and et cetera? or-
Not really. The real focus on any of the discipline law is preventing or doing other means of correction as we move along. So rather than getting to the point of saying you're out of school for a certain number of days, it's emphasizing the fact, just like the restorative practices, et cetera, that we're going to do things proactively. So this first policy is kind of the philosophical foundation of that.
All right. Pick up that mic just a little bit, Doctor, when you have a chance. I do have some questions for you, Doctor, from
Sure.
Dr. Farouk first.
So along the spirit of what you were saying about being restorative and preventative and everything, how extensive has our research been on and I'm going to speak to both this item as well as policy number 5144.1, the next item. How much has restorative justice research been incorporated in terms of both of those efforts?
The research that goes into the policy are based on research from throughout the nation,
Correct.
not specifically our district.
Correct.
So that has informed all of the new laws that have passed, as well the court
So,
cases.
so not to be compliant, but to be to extend beyond that in terms of based on
Correct.
research, because my sentiment is, and this is in reference to what Dr. Hanson was mentioning with my upcoming trip, is that we're going to be having a lot of really progressive information on this very shortly, and so ideally, I would like to propose respectfully to the board if we could keep this as a first reading instead of making a full action, and for me to come back and share some of those things on that we could incorporate. But in general, if it's something that you have been proactive on looking at this beyond compliance from a research standpoint, then that might be helpful for me to actually share.
And we have been proactive. We have, prior to getting this in here, we have been putting into place those things of the other means of correction. We have entered into an agreement with Loyola Marymount University and begun the process of training for restorative practices within the district as well. And the research throughout the nation in regards to all of this is when you do those things, suspension rate goes down, student engagement increases. So that's the foundation of this.
Very good.
So, and it's at the board's pleasure whichever way you go.
Mrs. Alavi.
I was going to make a motion, but I'll bow to your opinion on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
From your professional perspective, then you would say that the research that you incorporate in this is really at kind of at the forefront of what you've been studying nationally, then? That you would
Yes,
feel
it
that way?
is. It is. And again, the policy is the foundation, the philosophical foundations. The rules and regulations we put into effect will put the meat on that in practice.
Okay, and again, I know we're speaking on this item, but are you referring to the next item in the same vein then?
Yes, the next item actually goes into more in depth into that since it spends time on suspension and expulsion. And it calls out somewhere specifically restorative practices and things in there, I believe.
Okay, I mean, if that's your professional opinion, I'll retract my statement.
Dr. Farouk, we certainly, look, it's not every day, every few years, that one of us gets invited to the White House. So I think this board, I can speak for the board, that we're very pleased and honored if you would go, bring us back souvenirs, but if you would go and bring back information that would make this even a better policy if possible. I know Dr. McGuire has worked on it, but I think we all respect that. And so we're fine with holding both of these over. I think if you don't mind, Dr. McGuire, we'll just skip to the.
We brought it to you for a first reading tonight. At your pleasure, it goes
Okay.
to a second reading.
So, and, is that good, everyone? Okay. Very good, thank you. So we'll go to the second reading then on the, is there something outstanding in the second one that I need to bring out, or is it?
But again, the distinction with the distinction on the second one is this takes the general outline, this puts it more specific towards suspension and expulsion language.
And I'm going to count on you and Dr. Farouk to get together when he gets back from DC and setting things straight, refine this, and let's see it on our September 7th, I think it is, agenda. Very good.
You mean, yeah, September 7th. Okay.
All right, thank you, Dr. McGuire.
Thank you.
That concludes our meeting. No, what I miss? There's a segment I'm going to hold over, just if that's okay. All right. So we're going to go to our, I'm going to jump down to, is there any agenda items for future meetings that the board presently would like to request and/or later to Dr. Hanson and I before we meet tomorrow?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am, Mrs. Alavi.
I have some,
Please?
quite a few.
Okay, I'll lean back and we'll take notes. Go ahead.
I was going to cover these in my comments. Would you prefer I handle this separately?
No, Mrs. Alavi, if you'd like to put them in your comments, I see no one else. Go ahead, we'll start with your comments.
Okay. One of the topics that I was going to ask for more information about had to do with English language, academic English language learners, and some concerns I have. But before I did that, I was going to compliment our K2 Institute, which I sat in on. the other day, and I thought it was so exciting. And I learned that in first grade, you learn the basics for all kinds of sounds. So they teach them sounds so that the first grade year is very critical and crucial in learning how to read. One of the teachers came up to me during the K2 Institute and said that Riverside Unified has a policy she doesn't understand. This policy states that we cannot hold a student back unless they've an English language learner, unless they've had 2 full years of Riverside English language learner curriculum. And her issue was that oftentimes what happens is kids go through first grade and second grade, and they won't let kids repeat the first grade, which is the basics and the phonics and the sound building. Instead, they automatically push them forward to second grade, and they don't allow them to have that second year. And then holding them back, which they sometimes inevitably do, is not as valuable because the second grade year does not have those building blocks. So in glancing at the SELT scores and taking everything into consideration, I was hoping that we might have, bring back to the board a little bit more information about our academic English learners and what we are doing or not doing for them at that early stage. And then Mr. Lee and I went to a program that was sponsored by UCR. You remember the program last spring where we went into classrooms in Moreno Valley where they were doing some very aggressive language building with kindergartners, and it was really exciting. It was almost hip hop. I don't know how to explain it, but it was very, but it was a lot of language, and it was very quick and a lot of signals, and I don't know, it was really exciting. And we brought that back after that particular episode. And what I would like to know is what happened to it, that suggestion. Now, it's okay with me if we see something that's interesting and we bring it back and you guys analyze it and say, you know, we analyzed it and it just doesn't fit our needs, but I'd sure like to have that come back so that we'd know why doesn't it fit our needs, or what was lacking, or why it doesn't fit into our program. Otherwise, we just feel like we're suggesting things that never go anywhere. So that was one of my topics. The other topic had to do with air quality control, and I spoke to Dr. Hanson about this. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but Riverside not only has had the worst air in the Inland Empire in Southern California, but it has had double the worst air if you go by the Southwestern Air Management Quality. Double the worst air. Worse than San Bernardino, worse than Moreno Valley, worse than Hemet, worse. I mean, it's been phenomenal, the scores that have been coming out, which I find a little hard to believe, frankly, that we could be so much worse than San Bernardino, but be that as it may, it's been approached to me that by Virginia Field and the Air Quality Management that we look into a program where we have our high school kids help them monitor the air quality, and that they actually have a program where they teach the high school kids how to go out and do these metered readings. I've suggested that Dr. Hanson follow up on that, but with the advent of the new headquarters here in Riverside, I thought that might be just a great program, and hope we can figure it out. And my final comment is not a good, is kind of a sad one. I've received 2 public comments this last week about the state of Gage Middle School, and I wanted to read to you the email I got. I feel it sadly appalling when I drive down Lincoln on my way to the local market viewing this school campus. I also feel it is a crime that the school district has taken a stand to supposedly do their part in saving city water, and to what end? What a waste of money to let all the landscaping die. I am glad I don't have children to send to school. Welcome back to school, kids. Such a depressing sight for students to walk into. I firmly believe the physical environment has a lot to do with a person's learning environment. It is a blight on our city and community, not to mention all the surrounding homes. My hope is that you would present my complaint to the school board on my behalf and let me know if our community can expect a better showing of our local schools' physical campuses. And I did go to the trouble, I have driven by Gage and been equally depressed. And so I went to find out what was going on. And I guess that Gage is one of our few old campuses that has manual on and off, but I've been told that due to operational restrictions, we cannot use our sprinkling system at Gage. But whatever we're doing, I'm not positive of the actual reasons that all of this take place. I know that you don't intentionally want our schools to look bad. But what I'm concerned about is that nobody else understands that we're going through all these machinations. If we're waiting for the bond, this is the wrong time to do it. I think we need a sign in front of Gage almost tomorrow that says, thank you for being patient with our landscaping plans or something. I commented on our landscaping plans at Gage, if you recall, last spring that they were looking bad. So I don't know what can be done about it, but I'd really like someone to look into this, because that's the second comment I've had about the Gage landscaping this week. And then finally, because I have flown a lot this last month, I found a really cool quote by Dennis Muhlenberg, who is the Boeing CEO. And there was an interview in the magazine about it, and they asked him, has Boeing had any difficulties finding STEM-educated employees in the marketplace? And his answer was, we're able to find the talent we need today, but I would say more broadly, we see this STEM pipeline diminishing. If we look out 10 years from now and look at all the sectors that will need STEM talent, we are concerned about that. I think it's one of the biggest strategic challenges we face as a country. And so it kind of reminds me that when we talk about STEM, we ought to talk about it in relation to getting a job, because this is where the jobs are going to be. And we should think of it as one of our biggest job promoting things that we do in the district. That's all.
Very good, Ms. Alley, very good. I drove by Gage as well, and equally depressing. I concur with your thoughts there. Dr. Farouk.
Thank you, President. I just have a couple comments I wanted to make. Lynn Carmen Day mentioned that we had our first summer graduation, and I just wanted to comment on that because I had the pleasure to attend that with Dr. Hansen. This was an extraordinary thing. The impact that it made on these young people's lives and the families, and how the tremendous gratitude they had was just unbelievable. And when I was talking to the students, several of them, were talking about how if they would have, been able to share this with some of their colleagues, that they might have pushed a little bit harder to be able to finish, now as opposed to putting it off, because it's such a huge difference between graduating, in June and then or waiting a whole year. So I just really want to commend the district for doing that. I think it's an extraordinary gesture. The other comment I wanted to make was we had a chance, Antonio Garcia, David Hansen, President Hunt, and I, to meet with the Mexico Consul General. And he was incredibly gracious with his hospitality and really connecting us with the culture and the whole community that they've established there in San Bernardino. It's tremendous, the service that they're providing in the community. But more importantly, with RUSD, the opportunities for potentially cultural exchanges, the resources educationally that they have, which might not seem immediately apparent that a consul general would be facilitating educational textbooks and resources, but they can do that, and these are going to be things that we can provide in our libraries, support our DLI students. Teachers can potentially have exchanges with Mexico. And for our students, even whether it's virtually, we're actually looking into doing physical exchanges that go beyond our Sister City program. But even if it's a virtual exchange, the experience being enhanced for a DLI student to be able to interact with someone up here in Mexico and get a real sense of what that person is going through, whether it's from a cultural, social perspective, I think is incredibly engaging and valuable for those students. So I'm really encouraged by the possibilities. We really try to be creative in how we set the agenda and the discussion topics beyond what typically the basis of how consul generals would be engaging with school districts. And so I really want to commend especially Antonio for really being thinking outside the box in terms of some of the ways that how we can engage with their office. And I'm assuming, you know, you're going to be the point of contact and following up and everything. But I just want to say I think this is a real great opportunity. And the fact that you guys had done that prior also with the Guatemala Consul General, I think, again, it speaks to our district really being very proactive in these efforts. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Root, for arranging that. Mr. Lee.
Just one thing. I know as a district, we heard Mrs. Alley say it earlier, like, well, how do we get results in a week? We have a tendency, because we're so big, to move so slow. And I think we heard a presentation today with what the Harmony Projects is doing, that we don't want to miss an opportunity to engage dynamic organization with proven results. And again, I know we're big and slow moving. We have a tendency to want to talk in committee and go back and forth. And I don't think we should do that. I also know that Riverside is competitive. And we heard Mr. Hunt talk about if Alvord's doing it, you know, they got on first. And the new Riverside Arts Academy music director, Alpin Hong, is actually also an employee for Alvord. And he's somebody that we missed. You know, we potentially could have brought him on. And he's Juilliard trained, he's a master. I mean, you hear him play the piano and you wish you could play the piano like him. So I can just imagine being a child and learning and listening to him play in one of our elementary schools, and being so inspired to want to continue on that path and have these dreams of going to Juilliard. So I just want to ask staff or challenge staff to find out what would it take to launch a pilot program, even if it's at one school next year. Not the following year, not let's try to complicate it and get 10 schools on. One school in the fall, and let's just make it happen. I know we can do it. We have the pieces in place now. I don't think we even need to wait for this VAP coordinator to get hired. We have a community partner in Riverside Arts Academy who's backed by all those partners that we heard. The city, which includes Parks and Rec. You have community leaders. You have Alvord. You have the County Board of Supervisors. You have the Police Foundation. You have the Chief of Police. So I hope we can make that happen and see where that goes. And I know we have a great music program already, but why not even make it better? So that's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mrs. Lock Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. First of all, I want to say welcome back, everybody. New school year. I know everybody's hard at work getting ready. And also, Dr. Hanson, I want to compliment you for the caliber of staff that we've been hiring lately. I've been very impressed with what's been coming in. And it just makes a great district even better. So I want to thank y'all for all your hard work. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and seeing all the good work that's been done. A couple things I wanted to bring up really quickly is, Mrs. Alvey, to your STEM comment, I just jotted this down very quickly, but not all STEM fields enjoy equal employability. I just want you to know that. So I think we have to be discriminating in what we recommend because, like right now, for example, I just read an article the other day, there's a glut of biologists, people with PhDs in biology, they can't get jobs. And also, I just know this because I was reviewing information also from UCSD for recent graduates because my daughter's there, right? So people with math degrees are not getting employed right out of college. The ones that are getting employed are computer science and engineering. Those are the ones that are making money and getting employed. Math, physics, biology, not so much. They just aren't. So I think we do need to be discriminating in that sense, but just not all STEM fields are created equal, says the biologist. So that's why I'm sitting up here. No. So the other thing I wanted to say was, Mrs. Allaby and I talked the other day regarding our English language instruction programs, and I brought up to her what I was seeing was a double standard, and perhaps our English learners, so particularly our Spanish speakers, I think are probably getting hurt the worst on this. I think they're not being given the same advantage as our dual language immersion kids. And by that I mean they're treated differently. There's a bit of a double standard out there. Our Spanish-speaking kids come in And we're told that they need their Spanish language instruction first and foremost, and they get it, and then they get shoved into these English classes, and they don't do well, as we heard, and sounds like there's a policy in place. The dual language immersion, I heard our staff here say studies that, oh, these kids, they do great when they start off learning in a language other than their own, and there's a disparity there. I don't know what's going on, but I think our DLI instruction might be fundamentally different than how we're treating our kids who are trying to learn English. So I would just ask to perhaps look at that. I think that ELL stuff has not caught up with the DLI. And there is a proposition that's going to be on the ballot that Mrs. Kakish and I heard about the other day regarding that, and I'll let her tell you about it. But, so this weekend I had a chance to meet with some faculty and residents of the UCR Medical School, particularly in the psychiatry department, and there's a couple of opportunities I want to talk to Dr. Hansen about regarding some studies and some things they would like to perhaps partner with us on regarding mental health outcomes in elementary school students. And then also, as I talked to Mr. Hunt regarding traumatic brain injury and studies on that, various methods on, there's a neuroscientist that's looking at that sort of thing. So I think we have some real opportunities to even enlarge our partnerships with UCR even more, which I think are great. And then lastly, I don't know if any of you saw recently that the PPIC, their research group here in California, put out a study that shows that the inland Southern California is again consistently behind the state in the number of degrees that are being attained and people living here, people with any kind of post training, post-secondary training. So it's abysmal. And you probably saw the article in the paper today about income disparities in our region, and those two things are intricately linked, and I know you know that. So I am working with Assemblyman Jose Medina to sponsor a hearing. He is the chair of the Higher Ed Committee in the Assembly, and so we're going to be looking at educational attainment rates in our region and why we have not been able to, what's going on? Why are we still behind the state? Everybody's improved, and we've improved marginally, but we're still behind. So that's going to be on September 22nd. So I will get more information out if anybody wants to do it. And thank you, everybody. Thank you. Happy summer and happy new school year.
Thank you. Let's all remember that we have some important dates coming up with new employee welcomes that you're welcome to attend, and also the professional development on the 24th, I think, Dr. Hansen. Is that right? Also, just quickly, a couple items. One, David Hansen is the newest member of Leadership Riverside class of, was it 17? That's right. So 17, yeah. And so we'll look forward to that, Dr. Hansen, hearing what you learned from there. Again, to compliment he and Daryl Hansen on the weekend, the clinic we had, and it wasn't mentioned, but David Hansen's comments were very well received, and when he talked about reminding coaches to care a lot about who they're coaching and to give them love and consideration. I don't know what that board years ago did with the extra year they got when they switched over, but I think it's just a unique opportunity that, usually you have a year and then you have to start thinking about the election of someone else, of half your board or 2/3 of your board. And we now have 2 years in front of us, and this year we've been able to move something forward which is vitally important. That's the bond, and we all need to be involved in that. But I hope that we'll use these 2 years for many things discussed tonight, but particularly to look at what the 1965 board did on busing. We really haven't, as a district, looked at that and how effective busing is or ineffective for our children. And those are the children that have and their parents have a lesser voice. So I think it's incumbent upon us. I know Dr. Hansen's already started on that, but I would like to be part of a board that made sure it looked at the 1965 decision and found a better way than just busing. And I think with the passage of the bond, we'll have that opportunity. I understand a lot of that money has to be for items that are shovel-ready, And so we'll be spending a lot of the next 2 years, hopefully with a good election in November, prioritizing design, charrettes and things like that, but improving landscaping, irrigation controls at Gage. And I fully endorse Mrs. Alavi's idea, even if it's, excuse me, Mrs. Alavi, even if it's a little disingenuous to say whatever we say, but it looks terrible driving by Gage, and by the way, that area votes. And it doesn't look like we're putting anything back into our schools, and that I don't know what happened there, Ms. Calhoun and Dr. Lewis, but that campus looks terrible to start school next week, and we need to do something. So even if it's a sign of that. I do want to also commend Dr. Farouk for leading, along with Antonio Garcia, this meeting with the consulate. I got to admit, I kind of went along just to go along. I wasn't expecting much other than, I did get a lapel pin at the end, and I was expecting that. What I wasn't expecting, and David had to quickly call and cancel a few other things he had going on, was just the tremendous reception we received. And because of them, they share with us legislative changes that have happened in Mexico. I think somebody ought to reconsider their wall if they get elected, because some great things that they offered, school books in Spanish for all of our classes, all of our campuses, just many other things. Being that conduit for our Parent Resources Center, that we can say, yeah, you know, we don't really handle this, but we know how to get it done, and here's the people you need to contact, and they'll help you. Now let's get back to helping you with your child's homework. You know, I'm sure it won't be quite that easy, but really ready and wanting to help us. They were really, it was very, very genuine, and I was highly impressed. And I think we, as Dr. Fruit talked about, cultural exchanges, and I look forward to what we can possibly get out of that, and give to that as well. I will be bringing forward a request to Virginia Blumenthal. We know she's a trustee, but she's also head of the American Heart Association Inland Empire chapter. She wants to come speak to us, and so we will schedule that, and to talk about including, as I mentioned a couple of meetings ago, including CPR as a course for our seniors to ensure they pass in order to graduate from our schools. Other communities that have done this have had an immediate benefit. They've seen all of a sudden, what do we have? How many? We had 1,600 high school graduates this year, Dr. Hanson? A lot. All right. Well, let's just say it's 1,600. That suddenly Riverside had 1,600 more young adults that knew CPR. And for a guy with 5 stints in his heart, I appreciate that. And there's already been, in community after community across America that have done this, results of people, you know, who normally would die of a heart attack or something, where someone was there to help them with CPR. So it's something that Virginia wants to bring forward, and I think it'd be great. We're going to close tonight in, let me just add before we do that David and I and Brian Frost also went to the funeral for the Sergeant Major of the ROTC Marine Program, Ramona. And, you know, it was sad, and his family was very wonderful and all. But it was, they asked, would the students that were under Sergeant Major kind of come over to this side, and this huge crowd of young people, and many of them with kids in tow, the little ones they had were there, and all of them, when one of them or two spoke in behalf of all of them, the impact that teacher had upon those people's lives, those young people's lives. And Kathy, that young man who was the Marine that spoke to us, that we sent to Sacramento, that got them to flip that law on its head about ROTC no longer being an elective for PE, was there, and it was very nice to see him. So I was glad I went. I was blessed by it. Tonight we're going to close in honor of 4 folks that have been with our district before, so bear with me. But Josephine Jo Turner was a prolific community activist and longtime teacher for Riverside Unified. She was widely respected in our community for her contributions to the American Association of University Women, the League of Women Voters, and the Mission Inn Foundation. She was a big advocate for Tech Trek and fostering education and career development for girls in STEM subjects. Josephine Turner. Mary Spires. Mary worked at several schools during her career with RUSD, such as Victoria and Bachapa Elementary, as well as Arlington High. She was also a beloved Girl Scout leader and a den mother for Cub Scouts. She will be dearly missed by all those who knew her. And memory of Eleanor Small, a longtime district employee, so well respected, is written here as an expert in Title I, that the U.S. Department of Ed would seek her advice. Her services are on August 23rd at 11. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Ruben Ayala posted. This shows you, as I've said before, come on, Tom, the power of a coach. That it's Shantz, right? Did I pronounce that correctly? Greg Shantz? Coach Shantz? Daryl? Shantz, thank you, I apologize. Ruben writes, it is with a very heavy heart that I struggle through this post. Legendary coach Greg Shantz passed last night. This man meant so much to me and to all the young men who had the privilege of playing for him. He was a mentor and a father figure to so many. He devoted his life to teaching others the value of hard work and dedication and to conduct yourself with class. Not one day goes by in which I do not draw my days of playing baseball at John W. North High School to deal with the challenges in life. To my ex-teammate Scott, know that your Husky family is here with you and is your family. You will be missed, Coach. So we also close in his memory. Thank you, everyone. Have a safe 2 weeks till we see you again.